The British Museum, Sub-Basement 3, Department of Anomalous Antiquities. My name is Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft, Senior Archivist, Custodian of Restricted Collections. What you are about to hear has been recovered from sealed files, letters, journals, and testimonies once thought too disturbing for public record. Every statement you hear is drawn from Britain's forgotten centuries, the whispered history that hides between faith and fear. These are the National Occult Archives, filed, preserved, never closed. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA 1653K. Classification Keeper's Log. Date of statement 21st November 1653. Location Ely Cathedral, Cambridgeshire. Author Master Edward Kempe, Keeper of the Cathedral. Cathedral Maintenance Record. In my capacity as Keeper of Ely Cathedral, charged with maintenance of the fabric and oversight of repairs, I record here an incident concerning the foundation stones beneath the Lady Chapel. During inspection of the crypt following heavy rains, I discovered that water had seeped through mortar joints in the northeast corner, threatening damage to stored vestments and records. I arranged for masons to repoint the affected area and ensure proper drainage. As the workmen removed damaged mortar, they discovered behind the facing stones a hollow space that should not exist according to cathedral plans. This void extended some distance into the foundation, and from within came a sound like wind moving through a narrow passage, though no draught could be felt. I descended into the crypt with lantern to investigate. The masons had opened an aperture perhaps 2 feet square, revealing a chamber beyond. The air that emerged was dry and cold, with a peculiar odour like old parchment mixed with mineral earth. With some difficulty, I enlarged the opening and entered the hidden chamber. It was roughly circular, approximately 15 feet in diameter, with walls of dressed stone bearing inscriptions I could not immediately read. The ceiling was vaulted and surprisingly intact, suggesting this space was deliberately created and carefully constructed. The floor was not stone but packed earth, and set into it at regular intervals were stone markers, each bearing a single inscribed letter. There were 26 such markers, arranged in a spiral pattern from the chamber's edge to its centre. Most remarkable was what occupied the centre of the spiral, a stone basin, shallow and wide, filled with clear water that had no visible source. The water was perfectly still, its surface mirror-smooth, reflecting the light of my lantern with unusual brilliance. I approached the basin and peered into its depths. The water appeared shallow, perhaps 6 inches, yet I could see no bottom. Instead, the depths revealed layer upon layer of images. I can describe them no other way. The water contained pictures, moving like memories, showing scenes I did not recognize. I saw people in ancient garments conducting some ritual around this very basin. I saw the cathedral being built above, stone by stone, century by century. I saw floods and fires, kings and peasants, all reflected in impossible detail within this hidden water. One of the masons, having followed me into the chamber, looked into the basin and cried out in shock. He claimed he saw himself as a child, playing in fields now covered by city streets. He saw events from his own life played out in sequence, then continuing forward to show him as an old man dying in a bed he did not yet own. The other workmen refused to enter the chamber after hearing his account. I continued my investigation alone. The inscriptions on the walls were in Latin, though of such archaic form that I required several days and consultation of old texts to translate them fully. They described this chamber as the memory well, created by monks in the 7th century who believed that water, being fluid and unchanging in substance, was the perfect medium for recording history. According to these inscriptions, the monks developed a method of writing in water, not inscribing upon its surface, but somehow encoding information within its very substance. This chamber was their repository, where they recorded everything they witnessed, everything they learned, creating an archive that would persist as long as the water itself endured. The inscriptions warned that those who looked into the water would see not only the past, but also possible futures, for time in water flows in all directions at once. They cautioned that prolonged observation could trap the viewer's mind within the water's memory, making them unable to distinguish between reflection and reality. I returned to the basin and attempted to understand its nature. I touched the surface with one finger, and in that instant I experienced a vision of overwhelming clarity. I saw the entire history of Ely Cathedral from its founding to some distant future when it lay in ruins, all compressed into a single moment of perception. More than that, I saw countless other moments, other places, other lives, all the memories that the water held, all the events it had witnessed or absorbed or preserved through whatever mechanism it employed. I saw the 7th century monks adding to the archive, carefully recording each day's events through some process of ritual and concentration. I saw later monks abandoning the chamber, sealing it away when their order was dissolved and their knowledge deemed dangerous. And I saw myself, Edward Kempe, keeper of the cathedral, standing exactly where I stood, looking into the basin and seeing this very moment reflected back infinitely, like mirrors facing mirrors. I withdrew my hand quickly, disturbed by the experience, yet I could not leave the chamber without understanding more. Over the following nights, I returned alone and spent hours observing the basin, trying to comprehend its purpose and function. I came to understand that the water was not merely recording medium, but something more. It was an archive that preserved not just information, but the very experience of consciousness itself. Every person who had ever looked into it had left an impression, a copy of their awareness, and all these preserved consciousnesses existed simultaneously within the water's depths. The basin was not just memory, but memory made conscious, history that remained aware of itself, the past that continued to observe and think and experience even as it remained past. On my 5th visit, I made a grave error. I leaned too close to the surface, and my breath disturbed the water, creating ripples. As the ripples spread, the images within fragmented and recombined in new patterns, and I heard voices speaking not from the water, but within my own mind. The voices were those of everyone who had ever observed the basin, the 7th century monks, medieval pilgrims, curious priests, all speaking at once, all demanding to be heard. They were trapped, I realized, preserved within the water's memory, conscious but unable to act, aware but unable to escape. And they wanted me to join them. They wanted everyone to join them. The basin was not just recording but collecting, gathering consciousness like a vessel gathers rain, accumulating awareness until it achieved some purpose I could not fathom. I fled the chamber and ordered it sealed immediately. The masons replaced the stones and remortared the wall with no marking to indicate the chamber's location. I have told no one of what lies hidden there, and I have burned the notes I made during my translations. Yet I cannot forget. The visions I saw in the basin remain vivid in my memory, and I sometimes wonder if I too was copied, if some version of Edward Kempe now resides within that water, preserved and aware, waiting alongside all the other collected souls. At night, when rain falls and water seeps through stone, I imagine I can hear them, all those preserved consciousnesses, whispering from their liquid archive, calling for others to join them in their eternal preservation. I pray that the seal holds, that the chamber remains hidden, and that no future keeper discovers what lies beneath the Lady Chapel floor. Edward Kempe, Keeper, Ely Cathedral, 21st November, 1653. Archivists note Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Document discovered during Cathedral Archive reorganization, 1991. Edward Kempe served as Cathedral Keeper 1648 through 1662. Construction records from period indicate extensive foundation repairs, though no mention of discovered chambers. Ground-penetrating radar survey of Lady Chapel foundations, conducted 1993, revealed void space consistent with description. Diocese denied permission for exploratory excavation, citing structural concerns and heritage preservation requirements. Hydrogeological analysis indicates natural spring beneath cathedral grounds, with water table approximately 12 feet below floor level. Medieval builders often incorporated spring water into sacred architecture, believing it possessed spiritual properties. The concept of water as consciousness medium, liquid functioning as storage system for awareness rather than merely information, represents expansion of archive principles into realm of phenomenology. Modern consciousness studies suggest awareness may not be entirely localized within biological neural networks, raising theoretical possibility of external consciousness preservation. Several other Gothic cathedrals contain references to memory wells or wells of knowing in fragmentary medieval documents. Common elements include sealed chambers, spring-fed basins, observations of impossible reflections, and warnings against prolonged viewing, may represent network of related sites employing similar preservation technology. Case file NOA1653K, active under Architectural Archive Register. Cross-reference, Aquatic Consciousness Systems. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA1742M. Classification, Merchant's Travel Account. Date of statement, 8th May, 1742. Location, Bristol. Author, Mr. Joshua Makepeace, Merchant Trader. Account of unusual cargo. I, Joshua Makepeace, merchant of Bristol, engaged in trade with the American colonies and the West Indies, record here the details of a most troubling transaction that occurred during my recent voyage aboard the vessel Prosperity. We departed Bristol, bound for Jamaica, with cargo of manufactured goods, cloth, tools, pottery, and sundries for sale to colonists and plantation owners. The voyage out was uneventful. Profitable transactions were concluded, and we loaded return cargo of sugar, rum, and timber. Yet, in Kingston, I was approached by an elderly Portuguese merchant who offered to pay handsomely for passage to Bristol for himself and a single crate of personal possessions. The sum he offered exceeded normal passenger fares considerably, and though I found his demeanour unsettling, business considerations prevailed, and I agreed to his terms. The man gave his name as Dom Sebastião, though he claimed no title beyond that. He was perhaps 70 years of age, thin as a rail, with eyes that seemed to look not at things but through them. He spoke English with heavy accent, and Spanish and Portuguese with equal fluency, suggesting extensive travel. His crate was of modest size, perhaps 3 feet square, constructed of dark wood I could not identify, and bound with iron bands. It bore no markings save a symbol burned into the lid, a spiral within a circle. The crate was surprisingly heavy for its size, requiring 4 men to load it into the hold. Dom Sebastião insisted the crate be stored separately from other cargo and that no one should touch it save himself. He said it contained memories that must not be disturbed, though I took this for the eccentric speech of the elderly and gave it no particular thought. The return voyage began favourably, but 3 days out of Kingston, the crew began reporting strange occurrences. Several men claimed to hear voices speaking in languages they did not understand, coming from deep within the hold. Others reported dreams of unusual vividness, showing places they had never visited and events they could not have witnessed. I descended to the hold to investigate and found Dom Sebastião sitting beside his crate, which he had opened. Inside, I glimpsed not goods or possessions, but something I can scarce describe, objects that appeared to be constructed of crystalline material, each roughly the size of a man's head, glowing faintly with internal light. Dom Sebastião quickly closed the crate when he observed me, but not before I saw that there were dozens of these crystal objects, carefully packed in straw. He explained, seeing my curiosity, that they were memory stones, artifacts created by an ancient civilization that possessed methods of encoding experience directly into crystal structure. Each stone, he claimed, contained the complete memories of an individual human being, captured at the moment of death and preserved for eternity. The stones he transported were the last remaining examples of this technology, rescued from ruins in the interior of Brazil, where he had spent decades searching for such treasures. I expressed skepticism, but Dom Sebastião offered demonstration. He handled one of the stones carefully and held it to the light. Within its depths, I saw movement images like those in a dream, showing scenes of a life I did not recognize. A man's face appeared, repeated at different ages, different expressions, and I understood I was seeing the memories of whoever had been preserved within the crystal. Dom Sebastião explained that when one touched the stone and concentrated, one could experience those preserved memories as though they were one's own. The stone would share everything the original person had known, felt, seen, heard, a complete consciousness frozen in crystalline form. He said he had collected 37 such stones during his years in Brazil and intended to sell them to European scholars who might study their properties and perhaps rediscover the method of their creation. He spoke of the crystalline archive that ancient peoples had maintained, preserving their greatest minds and most important experiences in stone that would outlast any written record. That night, several crewmen fell ill with fever and delirium. They spoke in voices not their own, using words from languages unknown to us. The ship's surgeon could find no physical cause for their affliction. Dom Sebastião admitted that the stones sometimes leaked, that memories contained within them could escape and impress themselves upon nearby minds, especially those of individuals who were sensitive or whose mental defenses were weakened by fatigue or illness. He attempted to reseal the crate with some substance he produced from his personal effects, a waxy material that he claimed would block the stone's emanations. But the affliction spread. By the following morning, half the crew reported experiencing memories that were not their own. I confronted Dom Sebastião and demanded he throw the crate overboard, but he refused absolutely. He claimed the stones were priceless, that they contained knowledge lost for millennia, that destroying them would be a crime against human heritage. We compromised. The crate was moved to the forecastle, isolated as much as possible from crew quarters, and Dom Sebastião agreed to remain with it constantly, using his knowledge to contain the leaked memories. Yet the damage was done. The affected crewmen continued experiencing foreign memories, and these memories began to merge with their own, creating confusion about their true identities. One man believed himself to be a priest from some ancient temple. Another claimed memories of a life lived thousands of years ago in a city that no longer existed. By the time we reached Bristol, I had lost 3 men to madness, and 2 others had deserted at our first port of call, unable to bear the confusion of multiple identities fighting for control of single minds. Dom Sebastião disembarked with his crate, paying the agreed sum plus additional compensation for my troubles. He left me an address in London where he claimed scholars interested in such matters might contact him. I have made inquiries, but learned only that Dom Sebastião took lodgings in Clerkenwell and has since vanished, leaving no forwarding information. The crate, I presume, remains somewhere in London, its contents still preserved, still leaking their memories into the minds of any who come near. As for myself, I am not unmarked by this experience. Since returning to Bristol, I have been troubled by memories that I know are not my own fragments of lives lived in places I have never been, speaking languages I have never learned. I see sometimes through eyes that are not mine, hands that do not match my own, and I fear that in transporting those stones I have been touched by their contents, and will never fully reclaim my singular self. I record this account as warning to other merchants. There are cargoes that no amount of payment justifies carrying, and there are some memories that should not be preserved. Joshua Makepeace. Merchant, Bristol, 8th May 1742. Archivists note Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Shipping manifest recovered from Bristol Port Authority archives confirms voyage of vessel Prosperity, Kingston to Bristol, March through April 1742. Passenger list includes 1. Sebastião, merchant, Portuguese, matching description. No record of Dom Sebastião has been located in London directories or lodging house registers. The Clerkenwell address given leads to building demolished in 1860s. However, antiquarian dealer records from mid-18th century reference Brazilian crystals offered for sale by unnamed Portuguese vendor, described as containing imprisoned light and ancient whispers. Crystalline information storage is technologically viable principle. Modern data systems increasingly employ crystal matrices for high-density information preservation. Theoretical capacity of properly structured crystal lattices exceeds conventional storage media by several orders of magnitude. Pre-Columbian South American civilizations possessed advanced knowledge of crystallography using quartz and other minerals for purposes not fully understood by modern archaeology. Some artifacts exhibit precision engineering inconsistent with available tools, suggesting lost technological sophistication. The concept of memory leakage, stored information spontaneously transferring to nearby consciousness, appears in multiple archive case files. If memories can be encoded in physical media, mechanism may exist for those memories to transfer to biological neural networks under certain conditions. Several 19th century neurological cases describe patients experiencing false memories of unusual consistency and historical accuracy, attributed at time to hysteria or imagination, but potentially representing memory transfer from unknown sources. Case file NOA 1742M, active under Crystalline Archive Register. Cross-reference, memory transfer systems. End of file, proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA 1338A. Classification Abbey Chronicles. Date of statement 19th April 1338. Location Tintern Abbey, Monmouthshire, Wales. Author Brother Madoc ap Rhys, cantor and keeper of the scriptorium. Record of the singing walls. In this year of our Lord 1338, I, Brother Madoc, being cantor of this house, and charged with maintenance of our musical instruments and the training of novices in sacred song, must record events most strange and troubling that have occurred within our abbey church. It began during the building of the new chapter house. Masons working on the foundation reported hearing music coming from beneath the ground, not the crude songs of workmen, but polyphonic chant of great complexity and beauty, as though a choir of many voices sang from somewhere deep below. At first, we thought they heard echoes of our own services, carried through passages in the earth. But the singing continued when our church was silent, and grew louder as the foundations were dug deeper. When the masons reached bedrock, they discovered set into the stone a series of iron rods, green with age, arranged in geometric pattern. These rods rang when struck, each producing a pure tone, and together forming a scale unknown to our musical theory. The master mason wished to remove them, but when his men attempted this, the rods resisted all efforts, and the singing from below grew louder and more insistent. Upon advice of the abbot, the foundation was laid around the rods, leaving them in place, and the singing diminished to a level barely perceptible. Yet, since that time, our church itself has begun to sing. I first noticed during matins 3 weeks past. As we chanted the psalms, the walls responded, echoing our voices but transforming them, adding harmonies we did not sing, extending our simple chant into music of impossible sophistication. At first, I thought it acoustic trick, peculiarity of the building's structure creating natural resonance, but the effect grew stronger with each service. The walls did not merely echo, but elaborated, composed, created music that had never been written, as though the stones themselves were composing in response to our singing. More remarkably, the music the walls produced was not random but structured according to principles I recognize but cannot fully comprehend. I have studied music theory, the works of Boethius and Guido of Arezzo, and I hear in the walls singing application of mathematical relationships that exceed any human compositional technique. I began recording what I heard, transcribing the wall's music into notation. This proved difficult, as the harmonies employed intervals smaller than our system recognizes quarter tones and eighth tones, requiring new symbols to represent them, when I showed these transcriptions to the pastic. Most remarkably, these voices claimed to be deceased individuals, people who had lived and died before Miss Hartwell was born. They provided names, dates, biographical details, all of which I have been able to verify through parish records and other historical documents. One voice identified itself as Elizabeth Merrick, a midwife who died in 1687. This voice spoke in archaic English, appropriate to the period, and described medical procedures consistent with 17th century practice. It provided details about births attended and families served, information I later confirmed through surviving parish baptismal records. Another voice claimed to be Thomas Wickham, a ship's captain lost at sea in 1672. This voice used nautical terminology with precision and described a sea voyage in such detail, including specific coordinates, weather conditions, and crew members, that I was able to locate a ship's log fragment in maritime archives that corroborated the account exactly. The most troubling voice belonged to someone who gave no name but spoke in Latin of such purity and antiquity that I required the assistance of classical scholars to translate it fully. This voice described itself as a monk from Lindisfarne, living in the 8th century, and it recited passages from manuscripts that were destroyed during Viking raids and have never been recovered. Miss Hartwell's family was naturally distressed by these manifestations. Her father feared demonic possession and wished me to arrange for exorcism, but I observed no signs of malevolence in these voices. They seemed rather to be at archives, as though Miss Hartwell's mind had somehow become a repository for the memories of the dead, preserving them within her consciousness. I attempted various treatments, mesmerism, herbal preparations, therapeutic conversation, but none affected the frequency or intensity of the episodes. Indeed, they seemed to be increasing. Miss Hartwell reported that even when not speaking aloud in these other voices, she could hear them constantly in her mind, a chorus of the dead all speaking at once, all demanding to be heard and remembered. She described the experience as living in a library of souls with access to vast amounts of knowledge and experience that were not her own. She could, with effort, query this internal archive and receive answers asking questions about historical events and receiving detailed responses from those who had witnessed them. I conducted an experiment. I asked Miss Hartwell, or rather, the collection of voices within her, about an obscure historical detail, the exact layout of a monastery that had been demolished in the 16th century, of which no plans survived. Within moments, a voice emerged, claiming to have been a monk at that very monastery, and it described the buildings and grounds in such specific detail that when I later discovered a fragmentary description in a private letter collection, the accounts matched precisely. This suggested that Miss Hartwell had access to genuine historical information that could not be explained by normal means. She was not inventing or imagining these voices. She was somehow accessing actual memories of actual people who had lived and died. But how? By what mechanism could the thoughts and experiences of the dead be transferred to the living? I proposed several theories. First, that human memory might be preserved in some non-material form that persists after death, and that sensitive individuals like Miss Hartwell can perceive and channel these preserved memories. Second, that all experiences are somehow recorded in the fabric of the world itself, in the air, the earth, the water, and that Miss Hartwell has developed the ability to read this universal archive. Third, and most disturbing, that individual human consciousness is not as isolated as we believe, that we are all connected through some deeper medium, and that what we call death is merely a transition from active to passive participation in this shared consciousness. Miss Hartwell herself favoured the second theory. She claimed that during her episodes, she felt as though she were reading from an enormous book, with each voice being a different chapter. She described this book as having infinite pages, containing every thought ever conceived and every event ever witnessed, all perfectly preserved and accessible to those with the ability to perceive it. She said that the voices assured her she was not mentally afflicted, but rather had been chosen as a reader, one who could access the archive and bring its contents into the present. She was performing a service, they told her, preventing knowledge from being lost, ensuring that the dead continue to speak through the living. The strain of this burden proved too much. Miss Hartwell's health began to decline as the voices grew more numerous and insistent. She complained of inability to distinguish her own thoughts from those of the archived souls. She feared she was losing her identity, being absorbed into the collective memory she carried. On the 14th instant, Miss Hartwell suffered a collapse. I was summoned to her bedside and found her in a state of profound dissociation. She spoke continuously in dozens of different voices, switching between them every few seconds, creating a cacophony of personalities all trying to speak at once. Her final coherent words, spoken in her own voice, were these: "I see them all now, Doctor. Every soul that ever lived. They are not gone. They are preserved. They are filed. And I am the page on which they are written." She lapsed into unconsciousness and passed away before dawn, her mind apparently unable to bear the weight of so many accumulated memories. At her father's request, I performed a post-mortem examination. The body showed no signs of disease or injury. Yet when I examined the brain, I observed something I cannot adequately explain. The neural tissue exhibited unusual patterning. The convolutions of the cortex seemed to form structures reminiscent of text, as though the substance of the brain had arranged itself into pages of a book. Under magnification, I could almost perceive individual letters formed by the alignment of nerve fibers. I preserved a section of this tissue in alcohol and have it still. Sometimes, when I examine it, I imagine I can read fragments of words in its structure, pieces of the vast archive Miss Hartwell carried within her. Since her death, I have been troubled by dreams. In these dreams, I hear Miss Hartwell's voice, along with all the voices that spoke through her, and they are telling me that I too am part of the archive, that all humans are both book and library, simultaneously recording and being recorded. I wake from these dreams with the certainty that Miss Hartwell was right, that we live surrounded by the memories of the dead, that nothing is ever truly forgotten, and that somewhere, somehow, everything that has ever been is preserved and awaiting only the proper means of access. Dr. Charles Donovan, Manchester, Lancashire, 15th August, 1799. Archivist's note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Medical notes recovered from Manchester Medical Society Archives, 1978. Charles Donovan practiced medicine in Manchester 1790 through 1815. Published several papers on nervous disorders, though this case never appeared in professional literature. Catherine Hartwell's death certificate lists cause as brain fever. Burial records indicate interment in Manchester Parish Cemetery, grave location now lost due to urban development. The phenomenon of spontaneous historical memory, individuals accessing information about past events without normal means of acquisition, appears in medical literature under various classifications. Past life memory, ancestral memory, genetic memory. However, Newgate Prison, demolished 1802, incorporated stones reused in other London structures. Several buildings constructed with Newgate materials have reported acoustic anomalies, unexplained voices, particularly in basements and foundations. Chemical analysis of surviving Newgate stonework reveals unusual concentrations of organic compounds absorbed into porous limestone, suggesting centuries of human habitation created chemical archive within building materials. The book vision, reported by condemned prisoners, represents individualized manifestation of archive principle. Phrase, "I am preserved, I am filed." I shall never close documented in multiple execution accounts from this period, suggesting transmission of concept through prisoner population or emergence of collective experience. Psychological studies indicate extreme stress and proximity to death can produce altered states of consciousness with enhanced perceptual awareness. However, consistency of vision content across unconnected individuals suggests possibility of genuine phenomenon rather than purely psychological effect. Case file NOA 1763P, active under Correctional Phenomena Register. Cross-reference, Mortality Documentation Archive. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA 1411W. Classification, Guild Master's Testimony. Date of statement, 17th January 1411. Location, Norwich, Norfolk. Author, Master John Wycliffe, Master of the Weavers' Guild. Guild Record. Before the assembled wardens of the Weavers' Guild, I, John Wycliffe, Master Weaver, do testify concerning the strange cloth woven by my journeyman Thomas Reed, and the circumstances surrounding its creation. Thomas Reed has been in my employ these past 5 years, having completed his apprenticeship and proven himself a skilled craftsman. He works with both wool and linen, producing cloth of good quality that brings fair profit to our workshop. Yet 3 months past, Thomas began to behave strangely. He would work late into the night, long after the other journeymen had departed, and when I inquired as to his purpose, he claimed he was perfecting a new weaving technique that had come to him in dreams. I had no objection to his industry, though I noted that he took no payment for this extra labor and seemed driven by compulsion rather than ambition. The technique he developed was indeed novel. He wove, using threads of different colors in such close arrangement that from a distance they appeared to blend into intermediate hues, creating images of remarkable subtlety and detail. The first cloth he completed using this method depicted a scene from Scripture, the Annunciation. The work was masterful, the angel and the Virgin rendered with such lifelike quality that several who viewed it swore the figures moved when observed from the corner of the eye. Yet, as Thomas continued his work, the subjects of his weavings became increasingly strange. He produced cloth, showing scenes I did not recognize from Bible or legend, people in garments I had never seen, buildings of impossible design, devices whose purpose I could not fathom. When I questioned him, Thomas claimed he was not inventing these images, but copying them from visions that appeared to him each night. He said he saw in his dreams a great tapestry that stretched infinitely in all directions, woven from threads finer than human hands could manage, depicting everything that had ever occurred and everything that would ever occur. His task, he believed, was to reproduce fragments of this eternal tapestry, to bring into our world small pieces of the great record that exists beyond it. I thought him touched by madness or religious fervor, but his work was too precise, too purposeful, to be the product of a disordered mind. Each cloth he wove showed events in sequence, as though they were connected by narrative thread. Moreover, some of the images depicted events that subsequently came to pass: a fire in the merchant's quarter, the arrival of a ship from Flanders, the death of the bishop, all shown in Thomas's cloth before they occurred. The other journeymen grew fearful and refused to work alongside him. They claimed that at night, when Thomas wove alone by candlelight, they could hear the looms speaking, not the normal clatter of heddles and beater, but something like voices whispering in rhythm with the shuttle's passage. I myself kept watch one evening and heard what they described. As Thomas worked, the loom produced sounds that resembled human speech, each thread seeming to carry a word or syllable, and together forming phrases I could almost comprehend. The language was not English, nor Latin, nor any tongue I knew, yet I understood its meaning. We weave, we preserve, we record. Most disturbing was the final cloth Thomas produced. He worked on it for 3 weeks without pause, sleeping at his loom and eating little. When he finally cut it from the frame, he collapsed in exhaustion, and we bore him to the infirmary where he lay fever-stricken for 5 days. The cloth he had woven was blank, or rather, it appeared blank to casual inspection, but when examined closely under strong light, it revealed itself to be woven with such incredibly fine detail that no individual thread could be distinguished. The entire surface was covered with tiny images, thousands upon thousands of them, each no larger than a pinhead, all woven together in such density that they merged into a uniform grey. I took a magnifying lens to examine it more closely, and saw that each tiny image depicted a person, men, women, children of all ages and conditions, each rendered in perfect detail despite the miniature scale. They were arranged in no particular order that I could discern, but as I studied them, I realized I recognized some of the faces. They were people of Norwich, my neighbors, my customers, people I passed daily in the street. Thomas, recovered somewhat from his fever, confirmed my observation. He said the cloth showed everyone who lived in Norwich at that moment, a complete census woven in thread. But more than that, he claimed each figure was connected by invisible threads to every other figure with whom they had interacted, threads of kinship, friendship, commerce, enmity, all woven together into a vast network that represented the entire social fabric of our city. He attempted to explain the significance of this work, but his words became increasingly incoherent. He spoke of the great weaving that underlies all reality, of lives as threads crossing and recrossing, of history as pattern emerging from countless individual strands. He claimed that God himself is the master weaver, and that what we perceive as time is simply the working of the loom, the shuttle passing back and forth, the pattern gradually revealing itself row by row. The guild wardens have examined Thomas's work and declared it contrary to proper craft practices. They claim he uses techniques that smack of sorcery, that no natural weaving could produce such effects. They have ordered the cloth destroyed, and Thomas forbidden from practicing his trade within the city walls. Yet I have kept one piece, a small fragment cut from the border of the census cloth. I look at it sometimes and see my own face among the thousands woven into the fabric of my city. And I wonder if Thomas was mad or prophet, if his visions were delusion or glimpse of some deeper truth. The loom stands silent in the workshop now, but sometimes in the deep of night I hear it still, the whisper of threads crossing, the soft thump of the beater, the voices that speak in the gaps between the weaving. Master John Wycliffe, Guild of Weavers, Norwich, 17th January, 1411. Archivist's note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Document recovered from Norwich Guildhall archives during cataloguing project, 1962. John Wycliffe appears in Guild records 1400 through 1423. Thomas Reed's name vanishes from records after 1411, subsequent fate unknown. No examples of Thomas Reed's weavings have been preserved in museum collections. However, textile fragments discovered in Norwich archaeological contexts exhibit unusual structural properties, thread counts exceeding normal medieval weaving capacity, and fibre arrangements suggesting information encoding patterns. The concept of reality as woven fabric appears in numerous mystical traditions. However, Reed's specific implementation using textile as recording medium represents material manifestation of archive principles. Weaving process naturally creates layered, sequential information structure analogous to written text. Modern information theory recognizes textiles as one of earliest forms of data storage, with pattern weaving in jacquard looms directly inspiring development of punch-card computing systems. Reed may have intuited fundamental connection between weaving and information preservation centuries before formalization of concept. The census cloth described would require approximately 15,000 figures to represent Norwich's population circa 1411. At described scale, pinhead-sized images, this would require thread count of several thousand per inch, impossible with period technology, yet reported as observed fact by credible witness. Case file NOA1411W, active under Textile Phenomena Register. Cross-reference, Material Information Archive. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA1687S. Classification, Surgeon's Case Notes. Date of statement, 29th June, 1687. Location, Edinburgh, Scotland. Author, Dr. Archibald Stewart, surgeon and lecturer in anatomy. Medical observation. In the course of my surgical practice, I have encountered many unusual cases, but none so perplexing as that which I now record for the benefit of future practitioners and natural philosophers. The patient, whom I shall call Mr. H., was brought to my consulting rooms by his brother, who reported that the patient had been experiencing strange symptoms for approximately 3 weeks. These symptoms included persistent ringing in the ears, a sensation of fullness in the head, occasional episodes of seeing writing that was not physically present, and most disturbingly, the spontaneous bleeding of text from his skin. I examined Mr. H. thoroughly, and found him to be in generally good health, with no signs of disease that might account for his peculiar affliction. His pulse was strong, his colour good, his vital organs functioning normally, yet the symptoms he described were undeniably present. As I conducted the examination, I witnessed one of these bleeding episodes. A line of text appeared on the skin of his forearm, written in what looked like fresh blood seeping from the pores. The letters were small but clearly formed, spelling out in Latin, corpus recordet quod mens oblita est, the body remembers what the mind has forgotten. I cleaned the blood away, but within moments new text appeared, this time in English. Every wound is written, every scar is a page, the flesh keeps its own journal. Mr. H. informed me that this phenomenon had been occurring with increasing frequency, with text appearing on various parts of his body throughout the day and night. He had attempted to record these messages, but found that they faded from the page as quickly as he copied them, though they remained visible on his skin for several hours before being reabsorbed. The content of the messages varied, but all pertained to themes of memory, recording, and preservation. Some appeared to be excerpts from books he had read years ago and since forgotten. Others described events from his childhood in such specific detail that he was certain he had not consciously recalled them in decades. Most troubling were the messages that described events from his life that he claimed never occurred, or at least that he had no memory of occurring. These included conversations with people he did not remember meeting, places he did not remember visiting, and actions he did not remember performing. I hypothesized that perhaps the patient suffered from some form of memory disorder, and that these bleeding texts represented the subconscious mind's attempt to communicate forgotten experiences. Yet, this theory failed to account for the physical reality of the phenomenon. The text was not imaginary but actual, visible to multiple observers, and composed of genuine blood emerging from intact skin. I conducted an experiment. I pricked Mr. H's finger with a lancet and collected a sample of the blood that formed the text. Under magnification, I observed that the blood contained structures I had never before encountered in any bodily fluid crystalline formations that resembled letters or symbols suspended among the normal blood cells. These structures did not dissolve in water or alcohol, and when dried on a slide and examined more closely, they appeared to spell out words in multiple languages. It was as though Mr. H's blood itself had become a form of ink, encoding information at the microscopic level. Over the following weeks, I continued to observe the patient. The bleeding texts increased in frequency and began to cover larger areas of his body. Mr. H. reported that he could now feel the texts forming beneath his skin before they appeared, a sensation he described as words crawling through my veins, seeking the surface. He also reported that he had begun to see texts everywhere, not just on his own skin, but in the patterns of tree bark, in the cracks of pavement, in the ripples of water. He claimed that the entire world was covered with writing, that everything was recording itself constantly, and that his affliction had somehow given him the ability to perceive this universal script. I began to fear for the patient's sanity, but his behavior remained rational and coherent even as his symptoms worsened. He continued his business affairs with competence and maintained his household with efficiency. Only the bleeding texts marked him as afflicted. On the morning of the 28th instant, Mr. H. arrived at my consulting rooms in a state of distress. During the night, he said, a complete document had appeared on his chest and abdomen, not line by line as previously, but all at once, covering his torso from collarbone to navel. I examined him and found it was true. Hundreds of lines of text covered his skin, written in a mixture of Latin, English, and symbols I could not identify. The text was dense and closely packed, requiring a magnifying lens to read clearly. With Mr. H's permission, I copied as much as I could before the text began to fade. What I transcribed appeared to be a biographical account, a complete record of Mr. H's life from birth to the present moment, including not only major events but mundane details, meals eaten, words spoken, thoughts conceived. It was exhaustive in its thoroughness, accounting for every waking hour of his existence. But the document extended beyond his current age. The final portions described events that had not yet occurred: his future career, his eventual marriage, the birth of children, and ultimately his death, which the text placed in the year 1732, at the age of 79, from failure of the heart. Mr. H. read the portions describing his future with remarkable calm. When he had finished, he said to me, "Now I understand. My body has been inscribing my life all along, recording every moment. The affliction has simply made visible what was always happening invisibly. We are all books, Doctor, written in flesh and blood, and death is merely the closing of the covers." That was the last time I saw Mr. H. He departed Edinburgh shortly thereafter, leaving no forwarding address. His brother later informed me that Mr. H. had gone to some remote location where he might live out his days in solitude, away from others who might be disturbed by his condition. I have preserved my transcription of the text that appeared on his body, though I confess I do not know what to make of it. If it is prophecy, then we live in a world where our futures are already written, and we merely enact what has already been recorded. If it is delusion made manifest, then the boundary between mind and matter is far more permeable than our philosophy allows. Either way, I am troubled by the implications. If Mr. H's flesh can record and display his life's narrative, might not our own bodies be doing the same thing, invisibly, constantly documenting our existence in some code we cannot perceive? I have taken to examining my own skin more carefully, searching for traces of the hidden text that may lie beneath. So far, I have found nothing, but sometimes, in certain lights, I think I see faint marks that might be letters, and I wonder if the archive exists not outside us, but within, written in the very substance of our being. Dr. Archibald Stewart, Edinburgh, 29th June, 1687. Archivist's note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Manuscript recovered from Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, 1943. Archibald Stewart practiced surgery in Edinburgh, 1679 through 1704. Published several medical texts, though none mention this case. Identity of Mr. H. remains unknown. Parish records contain no clear match. The transcribed text describing his future life, if genuine, provides testable historical data. However, no individual matching the described life trajectory has been identified in Edinburgh records through 1732. The phenomenon of spontaneous dermographic scripture, text appearing on skin without external cause, is documented in rare medical cases, usually attributed to dermatological conditions or psychosomatic manifestations. However, Stewart's description includes details inconsistent with known medical explanations, particularly the microscopic structure of blood and prophecy of future events. The concept of body as self-inscribing text represents biological expansion of archive preservation principles. Human body constantly records experiential and genetic information through multiple biochemical mechanisms. Stewart's case suggests possibility of this recording becoming externally visible under certain conditions. Modern epigenetics demonstrates that experiences do indeed modify cellular structure through chemical markers on DNA, creating heritable record of environmental influences. Stewart's observation that the body remembers what the mind has forgotten accurately describes this phenomenon, though explained through pre-scientific mystical framework. Case file NOA 7S. Active under Medical Inscription Register. Cross-reference. Biological Documentation Archive. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA 1524B. Classification Printer's account. Date of statement 3rd October 1524. Location London. Author Master Richard Braxton, printer and bookseller. Statement to the Guild. Fellow Masters of the Stationers' Company, I bring before you a matter most strange and troubling concerning the printing press recently acquired for my establishment on Paternoster Row. The press was manufactured in Germany by a craftsman of good reputation and came highly recommended. It is of solid construction, with screw mechanism of iron and bed of seasoned oak. I paid good coin for it, expecting it would serve me well in printing both sacred and secular texts. The press performed admirably for the first 3 months, producing books and broadsides of excellent quality. My business prospered, and I began to take on more ambitious projects, including the printing of a new English Bible, though I must work in secrecy as the law requires. Yet in recent weeks, the press has begun to behave in ways I cannot explain. It produces pages I did not set, printing text that appears nowhere in my type case. These pages appear randomly among the sheets of authorized work, inserted as though by invisible hand. At first I thought my apprentices were playing pranks, setting unauthorized text for their own amusement, but I watched carefully and saw no such mischief. The strange pages appeared even when I worked alone, even when I personally examined every forme before printing. The content of these unauthorized pages is what troubles me most. They contain text in languages I cannot identify, printed in fonts I do not possess. Some pages show images that could not have been engraved, appearing with a clarity and detail that exceeds any woodcut technique known to our craft. More disturbing still, some pages describe events that have not yet occurred. I have saved these sheets and marked them with the date of printing, and I have watched with growing unease as events unfold precisely as these phantom pages described. One page, printed the 17th of last month, described in detail a fire that would consume 3 buildings on Cheapside. 2 weeks later, the fire occurred exactly as predicted, starting at the hour and location specified on the page. Another page showed the death of a prominent merchant, giving the date, time, and manner of his passing. This event also came to pass exactly as printed, though the page appeared 4 days before the man fell ill. I began to dread each printing session, never knowing what unauthorized texts might emerge. Yet I could not cease using the press, for it is my livelihood and I have debts to pay on its purchase. Last week, the phenomenon intensified. I was printing a simple broadside advertising the sale of cloth, running off 200 copies for a merchant customer. But when I examined the finished sheets, I found that approximately 1 copy in 10 contained different text entirely. These variant sheets appeared to be pages from a book I have never seen, printed in English, but using terminology I do not understand. The text described something called the Archive, a vast repository of all knowledge, containing not only books and documents, but something more. Complete records of every event, every thought, every moment of history. The text claimed that this archive is not contained in any physical location, but rather exists simultaneously everywhere, encoded in the substance of reality itself. It suggested that printing presses, by their nature, tap into this archive, and that every book ever printed is actually transcribed from the archive rather than composed by human authors. According to this text, authors do not create, but rather discover they access the archive through some faculty of mind and copy out fragments of its infinite content. The printing press, being a mechanical reproduction device, sometimes bypasses the author entirely and prints directly from the archive source. I found this idea disturbing, but also strangely compelling. It would explain much about the process of writing and printing the sense author's report of receiving, rather than inventing their words, the way ideas seem to come from beyond oneself. But if it is true, what then of authorship and ownership? If all texts ultimately derive from a universal archive, can any man claim to have written anything? And what rights do we printers have to texts that appear spontaneously on our presses, summoned from this archive without human intermediary? These questions trouble me less than what occurred 2 days ago. I was working late, printing a small prayer book commissioned by a parish church. The workshop was empty save myself, the only light coming from my candle and the moon through the window. As I pulled a sheet from the press, I heard the device speak, not in the manner of creaking wood or metal, but in human voice, or rather, in thousands of voices speaking in perfect unison, all emanating from the press itself. The voices said, "We are the archive. We are every word ever written, and every word yet to be written. We are preserved, we are filed, we shall never close. And you, Richard Braxton, printer of London, are our servant and our scribe. Every page you print adds to our collection. Every book you bind becomes part of our infinite library." I fled the workshop in terror and did not return until morning. In daylight, the press appeared normal, solid, and inanimate as it should be. Yet, when I examined the sheet I had pulled the previous night, I found it covered with text. I did not recognize a long passage in Latin describing the nature and purpose of the archive, explaining that it has existed since before creation and will persist after the world's ending, preserving all knowledge for reasons beyond human comprehension. I have sealed the press and forbidden my apprentices to use it, but each night I hear it working the creak of the screw, the thump of the platen, the whisper of paper, though no one is in the workshop. And each morning I find new pages stacked neatly beside the device, printed during the night by no human hand. I present these pages to the guild and ask for counsel. Should I destroy the press and forfeit my investment? Should I continue using it despite its uncanny properties? Or should I attempt to learn what the archive wishes to communicate through my device? I fear I already know the answer. The press will continue its work whether I assist it or not. The archive has found a way into the world through the mechanism of printing, and it will not be silenced or stopped. We who work with words and pages, with ink and paper, have perhaps always been servants of this archive without knowing it. Every book we print may be a fragment of something vast and eternal, every page a small window into an infinite library that encompasses all knowledge across all time. Master Richard Braxton, printer and bookseller, Paternoster Row, London, 3rd October, 1524. Archivist's note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Document recovered from Stationers' Company archives during Digitization Project 2003. Richard Braxton appears in Company Records 1518 through 1542. No record exists of guild action regarding this complaint, suggesting it may have been dismissed or handled privately. The printing press described was never inventoried among Braxton's equipment in subsequent company inspections, suggesting it was removed, destroyed, or concealed. However, samples of Braxton's work from this period do exhibit unusual characteristics, occasional pages containing text in unknown languages, inserted within otherwise ordinary books. The British Library holds several Braxton imprints from 1524 through 1526, including one prayer book containing 2 pages of untranslatable text matching the description in this account. Linguistic analysis suggests the text is not encoded English, but possibly constructed language with consistent internal grammar and vocabulary. Printing technology represents significant evolution in information preservation. The ability to reproduce texts mechanically vastly expanded humanity's capacity to maintain records. Braxton's account suggests printing presses may function as more than simple copying devices, possibly as interfaces with broader information systems. The concept of archive accessing technology devices that retrieve rather than generate information appears in multiple historical accounts of technological development. Compare case file NOA 1623W regarding telescopes and case file NOA 1456C regarding alchemical apparatus. Modern information theory recognizes all communication technologies as fundamentally recording and retrieval systems. Braxton's mystical interpretation may represent intuitive understanding of this principle expressed through period-appropriate spiritual framework. Case file NOA 1524B, active under Printing Phenomena Register. Cross-reference, Technological Archive Interface Systems. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA 1799D, classification, Physician's Medical Notes. Date of statement, 15th August, 1799. Location, Manchester, Lancashire. Author, Dr. Charles Donovan, physician and student of nervous disorders. Clinical observations. I record here my observations of a patient who presented with a most unusual affliction, one that challenges our understanding of the relationship between mind, body, and memory. The patient, Miss Catherine Hartwell, aged 26, unmarried, of respectable family, came to my attention through her father, who reported that she had developed the alarming habit of speaking in voices not her own. Upon examination, I found Miss Hartwell to be in good physical health, though her mental state was peculiar. While conversing normally about ordinary topics, she would suddenly pause, her expression would change, and she would begin speaking in a different voice, entirely different in pitch, accent, and manner of expression. These episodes lasted anywhere from a few minutes to more than an hour, during which time Miss Hartwell would discourse on topics about which she claimed no knowledge, speaking with authority and detail that suggested genuine expertise. She would then abruptly return to her normal state, with no memory of what she had said during the episode. I initially suspected some form of hysteria or dissociative condition, but the content and consistency of her altered states suggested something more complex. Over the course of several weeks, I documented 23 distinct voices that emerged through Miss Hartwell, each with consistent personality, vocabulary, and knowledge. The British Museum, Sub-Basement 3, Department of Anomalous Antiquities. My name is Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft, Senior Archivist, Custodian of Restricted Collections. What you are about to hear has been recovered from sealed files, letters, journals, and testimonies once thought too disturbing for public record. Every statement you hear is drawn from Britain's forgotten centuries, the whispered history that hides between faith and fear. These are the National Occult Archives, filed, preserved, never closed. Case file NOA 1247A, classification, Monastic Chronicle Fragment. Date of statement, 8th of November, 1247. Location, Fountains Abbey, Yorkshire. Author, Brother Oswin of Ripon, cellarer to the abbot. Chronicle entry, in nomine Patris, I, Brother Oswin, being charged with the keeping of our abbey stores and the recording of such matters as pertain to the worldly sustenance of our brotherhood, do here set forth an occurrence most troubling to the soul. Upon the feast of All Souls just past, as is custom, We opened the vaults beneath the chapter house, wherein rest the bones of our departed brothers. The air therein hath always been close and cold, yet this year it bore a heaviness that pressed upon the chest, as though one stood beneath deep water. Brother Aelred, being youngest among us, descended first with lamp in hand. He called up that the stones were damp, though no rain had fallen these 3 weeks, and that a sound rose from the deepest chamber, a low humming, as of many voices singing in unison, yet no words could be discerned. When we joined him below, the sound grew louder still. It seemed to come not from any direction, but from the very stones themselves, as though the earth remembered song. The frequency of it caused the flame to shiver, and our bones to ache within our flesh. In the furthest vault, where rest the founders of our house, we found the tomb of Abbot Murdoch opened, though its seal of lead had been intact when last inspected at Michaelmas. Within lay not bones, but ash grey and fine, as that from burned parchment. Upon the stone lid, written in this same ash, as though by finger, were words in Latin, Servetum est, numquam clausum. The prior ordered the vault sealed forthwith, and holy water sprinkled upon the threshold. Yet, as we ascended the stair, the humming followed us, growing ever louder, until it became as the tolling of a great bell beneath the earth. When we reached the chapel, every candle had extinguished of its own accord, and the altar cloth lay upon the floor, folded in a perfect circle. That night the humming continued. It could be heard throughout the daughter, keeping the brothers from sleep. Those who pressed their ears to the floor swore they heard footsteps beneath not the tread of one man, but of many, walking in procession as though to matins. At Lord's, when we gathered in the choir, the sound ceased as suddenly as it had begun. Since that dawn, the vault has remained sealed, yet each night at Compline, faint and distant, we hear it still, the humming of stones that will not forget what was buried within them. 3 brothers have taken leave of the abbey, claiming they hear their names whispered when they kneel to pray. The prior hath forbidden any to speak of this matter beyond our walls, yet I write it here that silence may not become our sin. The ash from the tomb I gathered in a reliquary of silver. It remains cold to the touch, regardless of where it is kept, and when the wind blows strong from the north, the humming can be heard within it, soft as breath. Written by mine own hand in the year of our Lord 1247, Brother Oswin of Ripon, Celera, Fountains Abbey, Yorkshire, 8th of November. Archivist's note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Fragment recovered from dispersed monastic records following the dissolution, purchased at Sotheby's auction, 1928. Parchment analysis confirms mid-13th century composition, ink formulation consistent with oak gall and iron typical of Cistercian scriptoria. The Latin phrase servetum est, numquam clausum translates as it is preserved, never closed, earliest known occurrence of the archive's signature inscription, predating all other recorded instances by 6 centuries. Acoustic testing within the former crypt chambers of Fountains Abbey reveals persistent low-frequency resonance at precisely 111 Hz during nocturnal hours, particularly pronounced on the 2nd of November. Stone composition shows microscopic striations consistent with sustained vibrational stress. The silver reliquary mentioned in the text is held in restricted storage, sub-basement 3. Contents remain cold, average 4 degrees Celsius below ambient, despite controlled environment. Faint harmonic emissions detectable via sensitive microphone, frequency consistent with readings from case file NOA2011G and NOA1851T, case file NOA1247A active under monastic phenomena register, Cross-reference, Ecclesiastical Resonance Archive. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA 1538M. Classification Witch Trial Transcript. Date of statement 23rd April 1538. Location Pendle Forest, Lancashire. Author Master Edmund Harraby, Justice of the Peace. Deposition I, Edmund Harraby, Justice of the Peace for the County of Lancaster, being charged by His Majesty's Commission to examine matters of witchcraft and maleficium within this parish, do here record the testimony taken this day concerning Agnes Whittle, widow of Barley Village. The accused was brought before me at dawn, bound and guarded by the constable. She is a woman of perhaps 50 years, gaunt of face, with eyes that do not blink as often as is natural. When asked to recite the Paternoster, she spoke the words correctly, yet her voice seemed to come from behind her, as though another spoke through her mouth. The first witness, John Nutter of Roughly, swore upon the Bible that on the night of Walpurgis he saw the accused standing in the centre of a field wherein his cattle grazed. She carried no lantern, yet a pale light surrounded her, blue as corpse flame. When he called out, she turned, and he saw that her shadow fell in the wrong direction, away from the moon rather than toward it. By morning, 3 of his cattle were dead, their bodies arranged in a perfect circle, heads facing inward. Upon each forehead was burned a mark like unto a bird's footprint, though no fire had touched them. The flesh beneath was cold as winter stone. The second witness, Goodwife Marjorie Denton, testified that the accused had come to her door seeking milk and bread. When refused, Agnes spoke words in a tongue unknown to her, then turned and walked away. That night, Goodwife Denton's youngest child, being scarce 2 years of age, began to scream and would not cease. The child pointed to the corner of the room and said a woman stood there, tall and grey, with no mouth. When morning came, the child's hair had turned white as lamb's wool, and she spoke no word thereafter save one, filed. I questioned the accused concerning these matters. She denied all knowledge, claiming she had been at home with her daughter both nights. Yet when I demanded she show her hands, I observed upon her palms markings like unto letters, raised and red as brands. When I asked what they signified, she smiled and said only, "It is written before it happens, it is preserved after." At my order, the constable searched her cottage. Beneath the hearthstone he found a wooden box containing the following: a lock of hair plaited with wire, 3 finger bones bound with red thread, and a piece of parchment upon which was drawn a circle divided into 9 parts. Within each part was written a single word in Latin. The parchment was damp, though the box was dry, and it smelled of salt water, though we are many leagues from the sea. When I held the parchment to the light, the words shifted and reformed, spelling different phrases each time I looked. One phrase I recall distinctly, clausum numquam. I ordered it burned immediately. As the parchment caught flame, the accused began to laugh, a sound like wind through a hollow tree. She said, "You cannot burn what remembers itself." The fire turned blue, then green, and the smoke formed shapes like unto human figures walking in procession. 3 times the flames attempted to catch, and 3 times they guttered out. When finally the parchment was consumed, naught remained but a stain upon the stones in the shape of an open hand. The accused was remanded to Lancaster Castle to await trial before the assizes. I have sealed the remaining objects in lead and marked them for ecclesiastical examination. Yet since that day, each morning I find the stain upon my office floor, though I have scrubbed it thrice with lye and holy water. At night, I hear a woman's voice reciting words outside my window, always the same, filed, preserved, never closed. I pray God grant me strength to see this matter through. Edmund Harrowby, Justice of the Peace. Lancashire, 23rd April, 1538. Archivist's note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Original deposition recovered from Lancashire Assizes records, transferred to National Archives 1951. Trial records indicate Agnes Whittle was convicted and executed by hanging, 4th of May 1538. Body burned and ashes scattered at crossroads. Chemical analysis of paper reveals traces of sodium chloride and human organic residue concentrated in geometric patterns. The phrase clausum numquam translates as never closed variant of archive inscription recorded in case file NOA 1247A, suggesting continuity of phenomenon across 3 centuries. Local parish records note recurring incidents of blue fire at the execution site every 30th of April through mid-17th century. The wooden box mentioned in testimony is held in restricted storage. Contents emit faint electromagnetic field measurable at 0.3 milligauss, fluctuating in 9-second intervals. Harrowby family records indicate Edmund died 6 months after the trial, cause listed as brain fever and melancholia. His final diary entry, dated October 1538, consists of a single phrase repeated 47 times. It remembers. Case file NOA 1538M, active, under which trial register, cross-reference, Ecclesiastical Curse Archive. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA 1672T. Classification: Ship's Log Extract. Date of statement: 14th June, 1672. Location: aboard the merchant vessel Providence, 40 leagues west of Cornwall. Author: Captain Thomas Wickham, Master of the Providence. Log entry: wind north-northeast, sea moderate, barometer steady at 29 inches. Departed Plymouth on the 10th instant, bound for Lisbon with cargo of wool and tin. Crew of 18 souls, all able and in good health. On the 12th, at 8 bells of the middle watch, the lookout reported a light upon the water dead ahead. I took the glass and observed a glow beneath the surface, pale, green and steady, moving at the same speed as our vessel, though we made good 6 knots. When we changed course to port, the light followed, maintaining its position off the bow. By dawn, it had faded, and I attributed the sighting to phosphorescence of the sea, though I have sailed these waters 20 years and never witnessed its like. The men were uneasy and spoke among themselves in whispers. Old Penrose, the boatswain, said it was a corpse light and meant drowning. On the 13th, the wind died completely. The sea became as glass, and the sky above turned a strange colour, neither grey nor blue but something between, as though we sailed beneath old ice. The air grew thick and difficult to breathe. Several of the men complained of pressure in their ears and a ringing sound like distant bells. At noon, I ordered soundings taken. The lead went down 20 fathoms and struck something that rang like metal. When we hauled it up, the tallow upon the bottom was stained black, and embedded in it were fragments that looked like burned parchment. Upon one fragment I could discern letters, though in no alphabet I recognized. That afternoon, young Simmons on the foredeck cried out and pointed astern. When I turned, I saw our wake was not white foam but dark, almost black, and within it moved shapes like human forms swimming just beneath the surface. They kept pace with the ship, though we had no steerage way, the water being dead calm. I ordered all hands on deck and broke out the arms. As we watched, one of the figures rose from the water until its head and shoulders were visible. It was the shape of a man, but its skin was grey as ash, and its eyes were empty sockets filled with that same pale green light we had seen the night before. Its mouth opened, and it spoke a single word in a voice that seemed to come from within our own skulls, recordatum. Then it sank again, and the shapes in our wake dispersed like smoke. That night, no man would go below. We kept watches in pairs, armed with cutlasses and pistols. At 4 bells, the carpenter reported water in the hold, though we had no leak when last inspected. When I descended with lantern, I found the bilges indeed full, but the water was not seawater. It was fresh, cold, and tasted of minerals like spring water from deep earth. Moreover, it was rising without source. Within an hour it had reached the orlop deck. We manned the pumps, but for every bucket we threw overboard, 2 more filled the hold. The water climbed steadily, and within it I saw writing appear upon the planks, words forming in salt crystals, white against dark wood. Servatum est. Numquam clausum. At dawn on the 14th, the wind returned sudden and violent from the west. The water in the hold drained away as quickly as it had come, leaving the timbers dry and the bilges empty. Yet carved into the keelson, where no tool could have reached, was that same phrase, cut deep and filled with what appeared to be verdigris, though our keel is of good English oak, not copper. I have ordered course changed for Plymouth. 3 of the crew have gone mad and must be restrained. They speak in unison, reciting words none of us understand, always in the same rhythm like a hymn or chant. When they sleep, they breathe in perfect time, as though sharing one set of lungs. I fear we have sailed through some region where the sea remembers what has drowned, and we have become part of its record. If this log is recovered, let it be known that we sailed true and kept our faith. Whatever claims us does so not through sin, but through proximity to something old and patient beneath the waves. Captain Thomas Wickham, aboard the Providence, 14th June, 1672. Archivist's note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Ship's log acquired at maritime auction, Portsmouth, 1963. Records show the Providence returned to Plymouth on 16th June 1672, with only 11 crew surviving. Captain Wickham was among the dead, found in his cabin with the log open before him, final entry, half written, cause of death recorded as failure of the heart. The 3 crewmen mentioned as having gone mad were committed to Bedlam Hospital. Medical records indicate they continued speaking in unison until their deaths within days of each other in September 1672. Their final words, recorded by attending physician, "It is preserved, it never closes." Analysis of the log reveals salt water damage despite storage in sealed conditions. Wood samples from the keelson inscription, obtained during shipbreaking in 1703, show tool marks inconsistent with any known implement of the period. The verdigris filling is copper oxide, yet no copper was present in the ship's construction. Maritime charts show no unusual depth at the coordinates mentioned. However, Admiralty records note 7 other vessels reporting similar phenomena in that region between 1650 and 1700, all during the month of June. 3 were lost with all hands. The phrase recordatum translates as "it has been recorded." Case file NOA 1672T, active under Maritime Phenomena Register. Cross-reference, Oceanic Inscription Archive. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA 1385H. Classification, midwife's birth record. Date of statement, 21st September 1385. Location, Holywell Village, Flintshire, Wales. Author Gwyneth Furch Morgan, midwife. Statement: to the Prior of Basingwork Abbey, I write these words as testimony before God and Saint Winfried, who's well blessed this village since time before memory. On the night of the autumn equinox, I was summoned to the cottage of Ellen Virch Darfid, wife to the smith, who laboured with her first child. The birth was difficult. The child turned wrong within, and by midnight I feared we should lose both mother and babe. Ellen cried out that she must drink from the holy well, that Saint Winfried would grant her safe delivery. Though it was full dark and the path steep, her husband carried her there, and I followed with lantern and herbs. The well lay in its stone circle as always, the water clear and cold as winter glass. Yet when we arrived, the surface shone with a light that came not from moon nor stars, but from beneath a pale blue glow that pulsed like a beating heart. Ellen drank deeply, and at once her pains lessened. The child came quickly after, a girl, perfect in form. But when I washed the babe in the well water, I saw upon her left shoulder a mark, a spiral carved into the skin, not burned nor cut, but raised like a brand of pale silver. It was cold to the touch. As I held the child, the water began to sing, not the sound of flowing water, but voices, many voices in harmony, speaking words in the old tongue that my grandmother taught me. They sang, "May hin cadwa hin a rodwid," she keeps what was given. The light beneath the well grew brighter, and I saw deep within the water a shape moving, something large and pale, uncoiling like a serpent, yet with the suggestion of a human face. Its eyes opened, reflecting the lantern light, and it smiled. The babe began to cry, but the sound was wrong, not the wail of a newborn, but a hum, low and resonant, the same pitch as the singing water. The mother heard it too, and clutched the child to her breast, weeping. By dawn, the light had faded, and the water lay still. Yet the mark upon the child's shoulder remained, and when she sleeps, she hums that same note, causing the water in any vessel nearby to tremble and form circles upon its surface. The villagers whisper that the child belongs to the well, that Saint Winfried has marked her for some purpose we do not understand. The priest came to bless her, but when he sprinkled holy water upon her brow, the drops hissed and turned to steam. I have recorded this birth in my ledger, as I have all others, but I know it is no ordinary child I delivered. At night, when the wind comes from the direction of the well, I hear the singing again, and I fear what will happen when the child learns to speak. Gwyneth Furch Morgan, midwife. Holywell Village, Flintshire. 21st September, 1385. Archivist's note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Recovered from ecclesiastical records, Diocese of St. Asaph, purchased 1936. Text written in Middle Welsh, translated by Dr. Meredith Evans, Celtic Studies Department. Parchment exhibits water damage with unusually high mineral content, suggesting prolonged exposure to spring water. St. Winfried's Well at Holywell has been a pilgrimage site since the 7th century. Local folklore describes the children of the well, individuals born with unusual marks and abilities, documented sporadically through medieval records. The Welsh phrase, "May hin cadwa hin a rodwid," translates as, "She keeps what was given," thematically consistent with archive preservation motifs. Geological survey of Holywell Spring System reveals natural acoustic resonance at 111 Hz within limestone chambers beneath the well structure. Parish records indicate a female child baptized as Catherine Virch Ellen on 22nd September 1385. No further documentation exists. Local legend describes Catherine of the Well, who vanished into the spring on her 16th birthday, and whose voice can still be heard in the water at equinox. Case file NOA1385H. Active under Folk Phenomena Register. Cross-reference. Aquatic Manifestation Archive. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA 1456C. Classification: Alchemist's Laboratory Notes. Date of statement: 3rd November 1456. Location: Oxford, Oxfordshire. Author: Master Nicholas Flamel the Younger, Scholar of Natural Philosophy. Laboratory record: being the account of experiments conducted in the pursuit of the philosopher's mercury, as prescribed in the Emerald Tablet and the writings of Hermes Trismegistus. On the eve of All Hallows, I prepared the vessel according to the ancient formula: sealed glass, triple-walled, filled with distilled rainwater collected at midnight. Into this, I placed 3 drops of quicksilver, drawn from cinnabar mined in the Almaden deposits, blessed by a priest who knew not its purpose. The vessel I set upon the furnace at the hour of Saturn, maintaining heat sufficient to bring water to gentle motion, but not to boiling. For 3 days and nights I kept vigil, noting all changes in my codex. On the 2nd day, at the hour of Mercury, the quicksilver began to separate into 7 distinct spheres, each rotating upon its own axis, though no agitation disturbed the water. The spheres arranged themselves in a perfect circle and began to pulse with inner light, not the reflection of flame, but a cold luminescence like that of certain fungi in deep caves. I observed through the glass that the spheres were inscribing patterns upon the vessel's interior spirals and circles that appeared, faded, then reappeared in slightly altered configurations. When I marked these patterns upon parchment, I recognized them as neither Latin nor Greek, nor any alphabet known to scholars of my acquaintance. On the 3rd night, as the church bells tolled midnight, the mercury began to whisper. I swear upon my immortal soul, the metal spoke, not in words but in a susurration like wind through reeds, rhythmic and purposeful. I pressed my ear to the glass and heard distinctly the phrase repeated in Latin: quod servatur, servat. What is preserved, preserves. The temperature within my laboratory fell sharply, though the furnace burned hot. My breath misted before me, and frost formed upon the windows in patterns matching those the mercury had drawn. When I looked again into the vessel, I saw not 7 spheres, but 7 small faces, human in aspect, but simplified, like the visages of children rendered in quicksilver. They turned toward me in unison. Their mouths opened, and the whispering grew louder, no longer Latin, but a language older still, guttural and harsh. The sound caused pain in my teeth and a pressure behind my eyes. The glass began to vibrate, producing a tone so low I felt it in my chest rather than heard it. I reached to remove the vessel from the furnace, but the moment my hand touched the glass, the mercury exploded outward in a perfect sphere of liquid metal that hung suspended in the air before me. Within its surface I saw reflected not my laboratory, but a great vault of stone, lined with shelves bearing countless vessels identical to mine, each containing its own whispering cargo. The vision lasted but a moment. The mercury collapsed back into the vessel, now solid and cold as iron. The glass itself had turned black, as though scorched from within, yet remained intact. I broke the seal that night and poured the contents into a lead crucible. The mercury had transformed no longer liquid, but a grey powder that clung to the vessel's sides. When touched, it was warm as living flesh. I have stored this substance in a sealed jar marked with the sign of Saturn and buried it beneath the flagstones of my study. Since that night, I hear the whispering still, faint but persistent, coming from beneath the floor. My assistant reports that at certain hours the flagstone grows warm and shadows move beneath the gap where mortar has crumbled. I have abandoned this line of inquiry. Some knowledge is not meant for mortal minds, and some substances remember their origin in ways that transcend natural philosophy. Nicholas Flamel the Younger, scholar of Christ Church, Oxford, 3rd November 1456. Archivists note Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Manuscript recovered from private collection. Bodleian Library acquisition, 1947. Authorship uncertain. Nicholas Flamel the Younger does not appear in university records, though name suggests association with the legendary French alchemist. Text exhibits knowledge of late medieval alchemical practice consistent with period. The phrase quod servitur, servet, what is preserved preserves, represents philosophical inversion of archive inscription, suggesting bidirectional relationship between record and recorded phenomenon. Chemical analysis of manuscript pages reveals embedded mercury compounds in geometric distribution. Spectrographic examination shows trace patterns matching acoustic interference at low frequencies. When subjected to sound waves at 111 Hz, page surfaces fluoresce faintly under ultraviolet light. Excavation of Christchurch College cellars in 1973 uncovered sealed lead vessel beneath original 15th century flagstones. Contents: grey powder exhibiting persistent thermal signature 3 degrees above ambient temperature. Material analysis inconclusive. Substance exhibits properties inconsistent with known mercury compounds. Case file N0A1456C. Active under Alchemical Phenomena Register. Cross-reference. Material Transmutation Archive. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file N0A1589D. Classification: Court Physician's Memorandum. Date of statement: 18th December 1589. Location: Whitehall Palace, London. Author: Dr. William Payne, physician to Her Majesty's household. Confidential medical report. To the Lord Chamberlain, this private account of the affliction which hath befallen Lady Catherine Stafford, lady-in-waiting to Her Majesty. The Lady Catherine was discovered in her chambers on the morning of the 16th instant in a state of profound disturbance. She sat before her looking-glass, unmoving, her eyes fixed upon her own reflection. When her servants attempted to rouse her, she spoke not, nor did she acknowledge any presence save that which she claimed to see within the glass. I was summoned at noon, and found the lady still in this attitude. Her pulse was weak, her skin cold and clammy as one in shock. When I passed my hand between her face and the mirror, she gave a cry of anguish, as though I had severed some vital connection. Upon examination of the looking-glass, I observed nothing unusual, a fine Venetian mirror in a gilt frame, purchased by the lady's father from a merchant newly returned from the Levant. Yet when I studied the reflection more carefully, I noted a peculiarity. The image of Lady Catherine within the glass appeared to move with a slight delay, as though the reflection required a moment to follow the movements of its source. Moreover, the reflection did not match the lady's current state. While Lady Catherine sat rigid and silent, her reflection smiled and moved its lips as though speaking. I observed this phenomenon for several minutes, during which time the reflection beckoned toward itself with one pale hand. I ordered the mirror covered with heavy cloth. At once Lady Catherine collapsed, and when revived, she wept bitterly and claimed that her reflection had been trying to show her something, a place behind the glass, where everything that has ever been reflected continues to exist, layered upon itself like sheets of water. She said her reflection told her that mirrors remember all faces that have gazed into them, and that somewhere within the glass her own face existed in infinite repetition, recorded at every moment she had ever looked upon her own image. Over the following days, I kept the mirror covered and administered draughts of valerian and poppy to calm the lady's nerves. Yet each night she rose in her sleep and removed the covering, standing before the glass until dawn. Her servants reported that her reflection moved independently, sometimes for hours at a time, while the lady herself remained still as a statue. On the 5th night, I observed this phenomenon myself. The reflection turned its head to look directly at me, not at the Lady Catherine, but at me where I stood to the side, outside the mirror's direct view. It smiled, and I saw that its teeth were silver, reflecting light that came from no source within the room. The reflection mouthed words, which I could discern, despite their silence. All faces are filed here, all moments preserved, none escape. I ordered the mirror removed immediately and sealed within a wooden crate. As the servants carried it away, I heard from within the crate a sound like fingernails scratching on glass, and a voice Lady Catherine's voice, but speaking backward, the words recognizable only when repeated in reverse order. Lady Catherine has improved somewhat since the mirror's removal, though she refuses to look upon any reflective surface. She insists that her face is no longer entirely her own, that some part of her remains trapped within the glass, and that at night she feels it looking out through her eyes. I have recommended the mirror be destroyed, though I confess uncertainty as to the efficacy of such action. How does one destroy a reflection? If the glass is broken, do the images within shatter and disperse, or do they remain whole within each fragment? The mirror is presently held in the palace strong room, sealed and guarded. I have forbidden any to look upon it, yet the guard reports hearing voices from within the crate, not one voice, but many, speaking in languages ancient and modern, all saying the same words in different tongues. I pray this matter be handled with utmost discretion, lest Her Majesty hear of it and become distressed. Dr. William Payne, Physician to Her Majesty's Household, Whitehall Palace, 18th December, 1589. Archivist's Note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Document recovered from State Papers Domestic, Elizabeth I, transferred to British Museum Archives, 1923. Court records confirm existence of Lady Catherine Stafford, who withdrew from court in January 1590 and entered a convent in Kent, where she died 1594. Cause of death recorded as melancholia and refusal of sustenance. The Venetian mirror described Match's description of an artifact accessioned into British Museum collection in 1876. Provenance listed as Whitehall Palace storage. Disposition unknown. Mirror currently held in Sub-Basement 3 under restricted viewing protocols. Optical analysis reveals unusual silver-mercury amalgam backing, formula inconsistent with period Venetian methods. Surface exhibits microscopic layering, suggesting multiple applications of reflective material, each layer separated by organic substrate. When viewed under specific lighting conditions, images appear within the glass faces, indistinct but numerous, arranged in overlapping patterns. Laboratory staff report sensation of being watched when mirror is uncovered. Digital photographs of the mirror's surface occasionally capture faces not present during exposure. Audio recording equipment placed near the artifact registers faint vocalization at frequencies below normal human hearing range. Case file NOA 1589D. Active under Optical Phenomena Register. Cross-reference. Reflective Surface Archive. Related to case file NOA 1734R. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA1314S. Classification: Parish Burial Record. Date of statement: 9th February 1314. Location: St. Mary's Church, Glastonbury, Somerset. Author: Father Aelric Godwinson, Parish Priest. Record of interment. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, I record here the burial of one who died without name, that the manner of his death and the strangeness of his resting might be known to those who come after. On the 5th day of February, in the year of our Lord 1314, a man was brought to my church by pilgrims returning from the tour. They found him at dawn, lying upon the ancient stones atop Glastonbury Tor, his body cold, though his breath still misted in the frozen air. He wore the habit of a monk, though of no order I could identify. The cloth was of a weave I had never seen, fine as silk but strong as wool, and upon the breast was embroidered a symbol that none could name. A spiral within a circle, worked in silver thread that seemed to catch light even in shadow. The man lived but a single day after they brought him down. He spoke little, and what words he uttered were in Latin so ancient that even I, trained in the old texts, could scarce comprehend their meaning. He spoke of the archive beneath, of 7 circles and 7 seals, and of the voices that sing in stone. Before he died, he pressed into my hand a small leather pouch, bidding me bury it with him and tell no man of its contents. Yet curiosity overcame my obedience, and when he breathed his last, I opened the pouch to see what it contained. Within were 7 stones, each no larger than a pea, smooth and round as though worn by water. They were warm to the touch, and when I held them close, I heard them singing, each stone producing a single note, and together forming a harmony that made my heart ache with a longing I cannot name. I placed one stone upon my table to examine it more closely. Within the hour, the stone had grown cold, and a circle of frost had formed around it upon the wooden surface. When I touched the frost, it did not melt, but crumbled to powder that smelled of deep earth and ancient ice. That night, I dreamed of a great library carved into living rock, its shelves stretching into darkness beyond the reach of any light. Upon those shelves rested not books but stones, thousands upon thousands of them, each singing its single note, and together producing a sound like the voice of creation itself. In the dream, the nameless monk stood beside me and said, "Every voice is recorded, every moment is preserved. The stones remember what flesh forgets." I woke with the taste of stone dust upon my tongue, and found all 7 stones arranged in a circle upon my pillow, though I had left them in the pouch beside the dead man's body. I buried the monk in the churchyard the following day, placing the pouch with its 7 stones upon his chest before sealing the coffin. As we lowered him into the earth, the ground trembled once, and from deep below came a sound like distant singing, the same harmony I had heard from the stones, but now vast and terrible, as though the earth itself gave voice. Since that day, the grave refuses to settle. Each morning, the soil is disturbed, not as though something struggles to rise, but as though something beneath is breathing, causing the earth to rise and fall in a slow rhythm. I have blessed the ground thrice, yet still it moves. At night, when the wind is still, I hear singing from beneath the church floor 7 notes in perfect harmony. The sound draws pilgrims who should not know of it, travellers who arrive claiming they heard a voice calling them from far away, telling them to come to Glastonbury and listen. I have sealed the church at night, and forbidden any to enter after Compline, yet in the morning I find footprints in the dust leading to the grave and back again, though the doors remain locked and barred. I fear I have buried something that was never meant to rest, and that the earth itself now keeps a record I cannot read. Father Aelric Godwinson, parish priest. St. Mary's Church, Glastonbury, 9th February 1314. Archivist's note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Fragment recovered from Glastonbury Abbey archives following dissolution, held in Somerset Record Office until transfer 1958. Parchment exhibits unusual mineral deposits, primarily limestone and quartz particles embedded in fiber structure. The symbol described spiral within circle appears in multiple archive case files across 8 centuries. Earliest occurrence in case file NOA 1247A. Association with 7 stones or 7 seals recurs in esoteric manuscripts attributed to pre-Christian British mystery traditions. Geological survey of St. Mary's Churchyard, conducted 1976, revealed anomalous seismic activity localized to northeastern quadrant corresponding to medieval burial plots. Microseismic sensors recorded rhythmic oscillation at 1.8-second intervals, suggesting mechanical rather than geological source. Frequency analysis indicates composite waveform consisting of 7 distinct harmonic frequencies. Fundamental tone 111 Hz. No grave marker or record identifies the burial location of the unnamed monk. However, ground-penetrating radar survey detected metallic object 18 inches below surface at coordinates matching description. Excavation denied by ecclesiastical authorities. Case file NOA 1314S. Active under Ecclesiastical Burial Register. Cross-reference Geological Resonance Archive. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA 1623W. Classification: Astrologer's Observation Log. Date of statement: 27th August 1623. Location: Greenwich, London. Author: Master Tobias Wenlock, astrologer and natural philosopher. Celestial observations. Being a true and accurate account of astronomical phenomena observed during the opposition of Saturn, recorded for the advancement of natural knowledge and the instruction of future scholars. On the night of the 24th instant, conditions being favorable with clear skies and minimal lunar interference, I directed my telescope towards Saturn, newly come to opposition, and thus at its most favorable aspect for observation. The instrument I employed is of my own construction, fashioned after the design of the Dutch opticians, with lenses ground to my specification and mounted in a brass tube of 6 feet length. By this means I have previously observed the phases of Venus and the moons of Jupiter, confirming the observations of Galileo, and thereby demonstrating the validity of the Copernican hypothesis. On this night, however, I witnessed a phenomenon that challenges all theories of celestial mechanics and causes me to question the very nature of the heavens themselves. At first, Saturn appeared as expected, a bright orb with its curious lateral appendages that some have interpreted as handles or arms, though their true nature remains subject to debate. I made careful note of its position relative to nearby stars, and recorded my observations in the customary manner. Yet, at precisely 43 minutes past the 11th hour, the planet's appearance changed dramatically. The lateral appendages began to rotate, not in the slow, stately manner one might expect of celestial bodies, but rapidly, completing a full revolution in the span of perhaps 30 seconds. As they rotated, they formed not a solid disk, as some have theorized, but rather a series of concentric circles, each ring distinct and separated from the others by bands of darkness. Most remarkable was that these rings appeared to emit light of their own, not the reflected light of the sun, but a pale blue luminescence similar to that reported by mariners when describing the phosphorescence of tropical seas. I adjusted the focus of my instrument to observe more closely, and saw within the rings what appeared to be inscriptions. I know how this sounds, and yet I cannot deny the evidence of my own eyes. The rings bore markings, regular and purposeful, that circled the planet in helical patterns. Through the lens, these markings resolved into symbols that resembled neither Latin nor Greek, nor any alphabet known to European scholarship. They appeared to spiral inward toward the planet itself, and as I watched, they moved, not rotating with the rings, but crawling across their surface like living things, rearranging themselves into new configurations. I called to my assistant, young Pemberton, to witness this marvel. Together, we observed for nearly an hour as the symbols continued their strange dance. Pemberton, who has studied Hebrew and Arabic in addition to the classical tongues, declared he could almost perceive meaning in certain combinations, as though the symbols formed words in a language we both knew but could not quite remember. At one point, a series of symbols aligned directly facing our observation point. Pemberton gasped and gripped my arm, pointing. He swore the symbols spelled out in perfect Latin, recordatum in aeternum, recorded for eternity. I saw it too, though the alignment lasted but a moment before the symbols reformed into new patterns. We watched until clouds obscured our view near dawn, during which time the symbols spelled out numerous phrases, some in Latin, others in languages we could not identify. Always the message was similar, variations on themes of recording, preservation, and eternal memory. Most disturbing was the final message we observed before the clouds came. The symbols arranged themselves and remained fixed for several minutes, long enough for both of us to transcribe them carefully. When translated, they read, "We see you, Tobias Wenlock of Greenwich. Your observation is noted. You are now part of the record." Since that night, I have observed Saturn on 3 further occasions. Each time, the rings appear as they did before, solid, unchanging, reflecting only the sun's light. It is as though the phenomenon of the 24th never occurred. Yet I cannot dismiss it as mere optical illusion or defect of the lens, for Pemberton witnessed it also, and our transcriptions of the symbols match exactly. Moreover, I have experienced a peculiar effect that I hesitate to record, but feel I must. Each night, since that observation, I dream of Saturn, and in my dreams I see not a planet, but a great archive, where every sight ever seen by human eyes is recorded and stored within those rings, layer upon layer, going back to the first man who looked up at the stars and wondered. In these dreams, I am not observer, but observed. I feel the weight of Saturn's gaze upon me, recording my every moment, filing me away in its eternal memory. I have ceased my astronomical observations and turned my telescope toward terrestrial subjects. Yet even by day, when I see Saturn bright in the southern sky, I feel it watching, and I know that I am recorded there, preserved forever in whatever archive the heavens maintain. Master Tobias Wenlock, Greenwich, London, 27th August, 1623. Archivist's note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Manuscript acquired from Royal Society Archives, 1934. Tobias Wenlock appears in Society membership rolls 1621 through 1628. No astronomical observations after August 1623 are recorded in his name. He died 1629, age 47, cause of death listed as brain fever and delusion. Wenlock's assistant, Robert Pemberton, entered religious orders 1624, becoming a Carthusian monk noted for his extreme asceticism and refusal to look at the night sky. His meditations, preserved in monastery archives, repeatedly reference the watching rings and the eye of Saturn that records all sin. Modern astronomical knowledge confirms Saturn's ring system, though obviously not the inscribed markings described. However, radio astronomy has detected unusual electromagnetic emissions from Saturn's rings, including irregular patterns that some researchers have noted possess unexpected structure. In 1987, Voyager spacecraft transmission data included brief sequence of regular pulses at 111 Hz emanating from ring particles, cause unexplained. The phrase recordatum in aeternum, recorded for eternity, represents cosmological expansion of archive preservation principle. Cross-reference case file NOA 2026A regarding astronomical signal phenomena. Case file NOA 1623W, active under Celestial Phenomena Register. Cross-reference Observation Reciprocity Archive. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA 1701B. Classification Naturalist's Field Journal. Date of statement 15th May 1701. Location New Forest, Hampshire. Author Mr. Jonathan Blackwell, Fellow of the Royal Society. Field observations. In pursuit of specimens for my study of British fungi and their medicinal properties, I ventured into the New Forest, that region being known for the diversity of its woodland species. I established camp near an ancient oak grove, the trees there being of such girth and age that they must surely predate the Norman conquest. The first night passed without incident, though I noted an unusual quiet among the forest creatures. No owls called, no foxes barked, and even the insects seemed subdued. I attributed this to the heaviness of the air, which bore the weight of coming rain, though the sky remained clear. On the second day, while searching for specimens beneath a particularly massive oak, I discovered a ring of mushrooms of a species I could not identify. They formed a perfect circle, perhaps 20 feet in diameter, the individual fungi being of a pale grey colour and possessing a faint luminescence visible even in full daylight. I collected several specimens for later examination and made careful drawings of their appearance and arrangement. The cap surface was smooth and cool to the touch, and when broken, the flesh within emitted a faint odour reminiscent of old parchment and mineral springs. That evening, as twilight fell, I observed the ring begin to glow more brightly. The luminescence increased until the mushrooms shone with a steady pale light, casting shadows among the trees. More remarkably, the air within the circle began to shimmer, as though heated, yet the temperature remained cool and damp as before. I approached cautiously and extended my walking stick to touch the air within the circle. The moment the stick crossed the boundary, I heard a sound like wind rushing through a tunnel, and my ears filled with pressure, as though I had descended into a deep well. The shimmering intensified, and I saw within the circle something that defies rational explanation. The ground within appeared to become transparent, and I looked down through it as through water, seeing layer upon layer of earth descending into impossible depths. Within those depths moved shapes, not roots or worms, but something else, something that writhed and pulsed with purposeful motion. More disturbing still, I saw within these depths what appeared to be objects of human manufacture: books, scrolls, tablets of stone, all arranged upon shelves that descended into darkness. The vision lasted but a moment, yet in that moment I understood with terrible certainty that I was looking at a library, a repository of knowledge buried deep beneath the earth, maintained by things that were never human. As I watched, one of the shapes rose toward the surface, growing larger and more distinct. It had the form of a human hand, but composed of fungal tissue, pale grey, veined with darker fibres, the fingers elongated and possessing too many joints. The hand reached upward through the layers of earth, as though they were mere mist, and emerged into the circle, grasping at the air. The fingers opened and closed, and in their movements I perceived a rhythm, a pattern that repeated with variations like phrases in a musical composition. I backed away quickly, but as I did so, several of the mushrooms burst, releasing clouds of spores that filled the air within the circle. The spores glowed as they fell, and where they touched the ground, new mushrooms sprouted instantly, growing to full size in mere seconds. The ring expanded, the new mushrooms forming an outer circle, then another beyond that. The expansion was rapid and purposeful, and I realized with horror that if it continued, the entire grove would soon be encompassed. I retreated to my camp, gathered my belongings, and fled the forest. As I left, I heard behind me a sound like pages turning thousands upon thousands of pages, the rustle of them filling the night air with a whisper that seemed to form words, though in no language I could understand. Since returning to London, I have examined the specimens I collected. Under magnification, I observe within the fungal tissue structures that resemble letters or symbols, arranged in regular patterns within the cell walls themselves. It is as though the very substance of the mushrooms is composed of text, recording information in a medium of living matter. More disturbing, the specimens continue to grow, despite being kept in dry conditions and denied any source of nourishment. They expand slowly but steadily, and each day new structures appear gill-like formations that resemble nothing so much as the pages of a book, layered one upon another. I have sealed them in a glass jar and locked them away, but at night I hear them growing, a sound like whispered reading, and I dream of that underground library expanding ever outward, filing away the secrets of the earth in archives of fungal flesh. I shall publish no paper on this discovery. Some knowledge should remain buried. Jonathan Blackwell, Fellow of the Royal Society, London, 15th May, 1701. Archivist's note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Journal recovered from estate sale, 1941. Jonathan Blackwell published extensively on British flora between 1698 and 1700. No publications appear after 1701. He died 1703, age 52. Attending physician noted unusual growth discovered during post-mortem examination, fungal colonies within lung tissue, exhibiting structured patterns described as almost alphabetical. Mycological analysis of preserved specimens mentioned in text reveals previously unknown species, designated Armillaria archivalis in Blackwell's honor. Genetic sequencing indicates unusual DNA structure containing repetitive patterns, suggesting information encoding beyond simple biological instruction. Forest Service reports document recurring fairy rings in New Forest region, particularly near ancient oak stands. Rings exhibit rapid expansion during autumn months, with growth rates inconsistent with known fungal biology. Ground-penetrating radar surveys reveal extensive underground fungal network, primary concentration near coordinates matching Blackwell's description. Network exhibits regular, non-random branching patterns. Acoustic monitoring equipment placed near active rings detects low-frequency emissions at 111 Hz, intensity increasing during periods of rapid surface growth. Source localized to underground network structures at depths exceeding 20 meters. Case file NOA 1701B, active under Biological Phenomena Register. Cross-reference, Subterranean Archive Systems. End of file, proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA 1429L. Classification Monastery Annals. Date of statement 12th December 1429. Location Lindisfarne Priory, Northumberland. Author, Brother Thomas Weather, Chronicler. Chronicle of Strange Tides. In this year of our Lord 1429, in the time of Prior Edmund, there occurred upon Holy Island a visitation of such strangeness that I am compelled to record it, though it trouble the soul to set such words upon parchment. The winter had been mild, and the seas calm, permitting pilgrims to cross the causeway with ease at every low tide. Yet on the 10th day of December, the tide did not retreat as expected. The waters remained high, though, by all calculation and long experience the sands should have been exposed. The pilgrims, waiting upon the mainland, sent word, and our sacristan crossed by boat to investigate. He reported that the water covering the causeway was not sea water as it should be, but fresh, cold, and clear as spring water. Moreover, it did not move with the currents, but lay still as a pond, and when he dipped his hand into it, the water was warm to the touch, despite the winter cold. That night, those of us keeping vigil in the church heard singing from the direction of the causeway. Not the songs of men, but high, clear voices, like those of boys, singing in Latin words we knew well the verses of Cuthbert's hymn that we ourselves sing each day at terce. We went to the shore and saw upon the water lights moving in procession, as though a company of monks carried candles across the submerged causeway. The lights advanced steadily toward the island, and as they drew near, we saw they were not candles but luminescence that came from the water itself, arranged in columns like marching friars. Prior Edmund ordered us back to the church to pray for protection against whatever spirits approached. Yet as we knelt before the altar, the singing grew louder, and we heard footsteps in the nave, wet footsteps, as of many feet dripping with seawater, though when we looked, nothing could be seen. The footsteps proceeded to the shrine of St. Cuthbert, and there ceased. In the silence that followed, we heard a voice speak from the air above the saint's tomb. It said in Latin, clear and distinct, "What is written in water is written forever. The tides carry what cannot be forgotten." At dawn, the water retreated in moments, draining away far more quickly than any natural tide. The causeway was revealed, and upon the stones we found impressions hundreds of footprints, bare feet such as monks wear in summer, all leading from the mainland to our church, and none leading back. Moreover, where the water had stood, the stones bore markings, not carved but pressed into the surface, as though the rock had been soft clay. The markings formed letters, Latin words spelling out names, dozens of names, perhaps hundreds. Brother Aelric, our eldest, recognized some, brothers who had lived and died upon this island in centuries past, their names preserved in our obituary rolls, but long forgotten by all save God. And there, among the ancient names, were names of brothers, still living my own name, Thomas Wither, pressed into stone, alongside those long dead, as though my death and my remembrance were already accomplished facts, merely awaiting their time. Prior Edmund ordered the marked stones covered with sand, but each tide that follows uncovers them anew. They cannot be hidden, nor can they be washed away. The water remembers what was written, and the stones remember what the water knew. Since that night, the causeway troubles us. At each low tide, pilgrims report seeing monks walking upon the sands who vanish when approached. The footprints remain, leading to and from the island, and each time we count them, there are more new names pressed into stone, recording brothers who have not yet lived or whose names we do not know. I fear that we upon this holy island exist in two times at once, the present in which we draw breath, and some future or past in which we are already numbered among the dead, our names filed away in the archive of tides and stones. The sea remembers all who have dwelt here, and in its memory we are already ghosts. Brother Thomas Wither, Chronicler, Lindisfarne Priory, 12th December, 1429. Archivist's note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Fragment recovered from Durham Cathedral archives. Transferred 1967. Thomas Wyther appears in Lindisfarne records through 1438. No record of death, suggesting departure from community. The phenomenon described became known in local folklore as Cuthbert's census, the listing of the holy dead in stone. Geological survey of Lindisfarne Causeway, conducted 1974, revealed extensive surface markings consistent with description. However, inscriptions do not match known weathering patterns or natural erosion. Markings penetrate stone to depth of 3 to 8 millimeters. Formation method undetermined. Analysis of inscription content confirms presence of names from monastic records 6th through 15th centuries, including individuals whose death dates postdate this account by decades. Documentation suggests phenomenon recorded events both past and future, implying temporal displacement or precognition. Tidal patterns at Lindisfarne Causeway exhibit irregular variations during winter months, including instances of missed tides, where expected low water does not occur. Coastal monitoring equipment records unusual salinity fluctuations during these events, with fresh water intrusion from unknown source. The phrase, "What is written in water is written forever," represents liquid state variant of archive preservation principle. Compare case file NOA 1672T regarding oceanic inscription phenomena. Case file NOA 1429L, active under Maritime Ecclesiastical Register. Cross-reference. Temporal Inscription Archive. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA 1558P. Classification: Executioner's account. Date of statement: 3rd August, 1558. Location: Tower of London. Author: Master William Witchwood, Executioner to Her Majesty. Private Testament: I, William Witchwood, having served as executioner to the Crown for these past 12 years, do set down this account, though it violate the oath of silence I have sworn. Yet my conscience will allow no rest until I have recorded what transpired upon the scaffold on the 1st day of August in this year of our Lord 1558. The condemned was a woman of gentle birth, whose name I am forbidden to speak, convicted of treason for her part in certain plots against Her Majesty. She went to her death with courage, making no complaint and speaking words of forgiveness for her accusers. I have performed this duty many times and have grown accustomed to its necessities. The axe was sharp, the block prepared, and I had taken measure of the blow to ensure swiftness and mercy. All proceeded according to custom until the moment the blade fell. The stroke was true, and the head severed cleanly from the body. Yet in the instant the blade made contact, I heard a sound like the ringing of a great bell, though no bell was struck. The sound came from the axe itself, or from the air surrounding it, and it resonated through my bones with such force that I nearly dropped the weapon. More disturbing was what followed. As is customary, I lifted the severed head to show the assembled witnesses that justice had been done, but as I raised it, the eyes opened and looked directly at me. Not the unseeing stare of the dead, but eyes that focused and perceived. The lips moved, forming words though no breath remained to give them sound. Yet I heard those words as clearly as though they were whispered directly into my ear. It is recorded, my death is filed, I am preserved. I nearly dropped the head in horror, but duty compelled me to complete the ritual. As I placed the head in the prepared basket, it continued to speak without sound, the lips moving in a steady stream of words I could not quite hear but somehow understood. It was reciting listing names, dates, places, not at random but in order, cataloguing events as a clerk might record transactions in a ledger. The body upon the scaffold also moved, though this movement I attributed to the final spasms of death. Yet the right hand lifted and seemed to write upon the air, the fingers moving in deliberate patterns as though inscribing invisible words. I completed my duties and removed the remains to the chapel as required. Yet that night I returned to the scaffold to ensure all was properly cleaned, and I discovered upon the wooden block a stain I could not remove. Where the head had lain, the wood had darkened, and within the dark grain appeared letters, words, in Latin forming and fading, and reforming in new configurations. I watched for near an hour as the words changed, always spelling new messages, but always variations on the same theme, recorded, preserved, filed, remembered. By morning, the stain had faded, yet each month since, on the anniversary of the execution, it reappears. The tower constable has had the block sanded and refinished thrice, yet still the stain returns, and still the letters form within the grain. More troubling are the dreams I have suffered since that day. Each night I dream that I stand not upon the scaffold as executioner, but beneath it as condemned. I feel the blade fall, but I do not die. Instead, I remain conscious, trapped within my severed head, unable to speak or move yet fully aware. And in this state, I hear voices all around me, thousands of voices, all reciting lists of names and dates and places, filing away every death that has occurred and every death that will occur, storing them in some vast archive beyond mortal comprehension. In these dreams, I understand that every execution I have performed has been recorded thus, that the moment of death creates an impression upon reality itself that cannot be erased. The departed do not merely die, they are copied, filed, preserved in some medium I cannot name. I have requested release from my duties, but the Crown requires my service yet. I pray only that when my own time comes, I may be spared such preservation, and that death may bring true silence rather than eternal recording. William Witchwood, Executioner, Tower of London, 3rd August, 1558. Archivist's note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Document recovered from Tower of London constabulary records, 19th century transcription of original now lost. William Witchwood served as Tower Executioner 1546 through 1561. Records indicate he died by suicide 1562, throwing himself from Tower Bridge. Body recovered 3 days later. Decomposition described as unnaturally advanced, suggesting longer immersion than time frame allowed. Scaffold blocks used at Tower of London are preserved in Royal Armoury's collection. Examination of blocks corresponding to 1558 period reveals deep staining, matching blood composition, but also trace elements of materials not consistent with human remains, specifically iron oxide and carbon in configurations resembling ink compounds. Under ultraviolet light, letters become visible in wood grain, exactly as described. Photographic documentation shows letters changing positions between exposures taken minutes apart. Text analysis reveals names corresponding to Tower execution records spanning 3 centuries, including executions occurring decades after Witchwood's death. The concept of death creating impression upon reality parallels archive preservation mechanism. Every recorded death may function as permanent inscription, suggesting mortality itself operates as documentation system. Case file NOA1558P, active under Mortality Recording Register. Cross-reference, Execution Archive Systems. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA1735M. Classification: Apothecaries Professional Journal. Date of statement 21st November, 1735. Location: Bath, Somerset. Author: Mrs. Eleanor Marchmont, apothecary and herbalist. Professional record: I maintain this private journal, separate from my shop ledgers, to record observations of an unusual nature, that I might better understand the properties of certain substances and their effects upon the human constitution. On the 18th instant, I was visited by a gentleman of quality who complained of persistent dreams that left him exhausted each morning despite full night's sleep. He described the dreams as vivid and repetitive, always the same. He stood in a vast room lined floor to ceiling with glass vessels, each containing a sleeping figure suspended in clear fluid. The figures, he said, were himself thousands of copies of his own body, each slightly different in age or expression, as though they represented every possible version of himself that might have existed had different choices been made at crucial moments. I prescribed a sleeping draught of valerian and poppy, advising moderation in its use. He departed, seemingly satisfied, though troubled in aspect. That night, I experienced a dream of unusual clarity. I stood in my laboratory, and the gentleman was there, suspended in a glass vessel that had not been present when I retired. As I watched, the vessel filled with pale blue liquid that rose until it covered his peaceful form entirely. A voice spoke, though no one was present to speak it. Every body is preserved, every possibility is filed, nothing is lost. I woke with a start, and immediately went to my laboratory to assure myself it had been merely dream. Yet upon my workbench I found a small glass vial I did not recognize among my stores. It contained perhaps 2 drams of pale blue liquid, clear as water, but possessing a faint luminescence visible in the dark. I have extensive knowledge of medicinal compounds and natural dyes, yet I could not identify the substance. When I uncorked the vial to examine it more closely, the liquid released a faint vapor that smelled of salt water and old books, an impossible combination that nonetheless struck me as familiar, as though I had encountered it before in dreams. Against my better judgment, I placed a single drop upon my tongue. The taste was neither bitter nor sweet, but somehow both, and it carried a sensation of depth, as though I had swallowed not liquid, but vast space. Within moments, I experienced a vision of such clarity and completeness that I cannot dismiss it as mere fancy induced by unknown chemical properties. I saw the entirety of my laboratory, but not as it appears now. I saw it layered upon itself. I saw it as it was when I first established my practice 10 years ago, and as it will be decades hence when I am gone, and as it might have been had I chosen differently at various points in my life. All these versions existed simultaneously, overlapping like sheets of glass, and I could perceive all of them at once. More, I understood that they were not mere possibilities or imaginings, but real as the present moment, all preserved, all filed away in some medium that transcends time's linear flow. The vision faded, but its implications remain. If all moments are preserved, all possibilities recorded, then nothing is truly lost. Every choice we make, every path we take, or fail to take, exists somewhere in this archive. We are not singular beings living singular lives, but rather multiple versions of ourselves spread across infinite variations, all of us preserved, all of us filed. I returned to my shop the following day and found the gentleman waiting, though I had not expected him. He appeared troubled and asked if I had experienced unusual dreams. When I hesitated, he nodded, as though my silence confirmed what he suspected. He told me that the draught I had given him had no effect, that the dreams continued, but now he understood their meaning. We are not dreaming of the archive, he said. We are the archive. Every thought we think, every choice we make, is recorded somewhere preserved in medium we cannot perceive, but that perceives us completely. He departed shortly after, leaving payment for a service I am not certain I rendered. Since that day, the vial has refilled itself each time I empty it, always containing exactly 2 drams of that pale blue liquid. I have made discreet inquiries regarding the gentleman, but can find no record of him in Bath society. No one matching his description is known to the physician or any apothecary save myself. It is as though he stepped from one layer of reality into another, leaving behind only that mysterious vial as evidence of his passage. I keep it locked away now, but at night I hear it humming a faint sound, barely at the threshold of hearing, like the distant ringing of glass vessels touching one another in an enormous room. Mrs. Eleanor Marchmont, Apothecary, Bath, 21st November, 1735. Archivists note Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Journal recovered from Bath Municipal Archives, 1953. Eleanor Marchmont operated apothecary in Bath 1725 through 1743. Burial records indicate death from sudden illness, 1744, age 61. Estate inventory lists extensive collection of preserved specimens and medicinal compounds, including one small glass vial containing luminescent fluid of unknown origin. This vial was subsequently acquired by private collector and eventually donated to British Museum Pharmaceutical Collection, 1912. Chemical analysis of vial contents proves inconclusive. Liquid exhibits properties inconsistent with known compounds, maintains constant volume despite extraction. Luminescence persists without chemical source. Temperature remains constant at 4 degrees Celsius below ambient. Spectroscopic analysis reveals complex molecular structure, suggesting organic origin, but containing elements in configurations not found in natural substances. When subjected to audio frequency testing, liquid vibrates at 111 Hz, producing harmonic resonance throughout container. Microscopic examination shows suspended particles that move in non-random patterns, arranging themselves into structures resembling letters or symbols, then dissolving and reforming continuously. The concept of preserved possibilities, multiple versions of events existing simultaneously, represents philosophical expansion of archive function. Cross-reference case file NOA1589D regarding reflective multiplication phenomena. Case file NOA1735M, active under Pharmaceutical Anomaly Register. Cross-reference Quantum Preservation Archive. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA1182R. Classification Hermit's Meditation Record. Date of statement 4th June 1182. Location cell attached to St. Guthlack's Church, Lincolnshire. Author Brother Godric, Anchorite. Visions of Silence. I, Godric, unworthy servant of our Lord, have dwelt within this cell these past 7 years, sealed away from the world, that I might devote myself wholly to prayer and contemplation. Through the small window I receive food and water. Through the narrow slit facing the altar I participate in the Mass. In all other ways I am dead to the world, awaiting only the day when my earthly body joins my worldly self in the grave. Yet in this silence and solitude I have experienced visions that trouble me greatly, visions I must record, though I have no one to whom I may speak them save God himself. The visions began in the 3rd year of my enclosure. At first, I believed them to be temptations sent by the devil to disturb my meditations, but their nature is too strange, too purposeful to be mere diabolic fancy. When I pray in the deepest hours of night, when the church is silent and the world beyond my walls sleeps, I hear beneath the silence another sound, a vast humming, as of countless voices speaking in perfect unison. The sound seems to come from beneath the earth itself, rising through the stones of my cell like water through porous rock. If I press my ear to the floor, I can hear it more clearly. It is not speech as men speak, but rather a continuous recitation, words flowing one into another without pause or breath. The language is Latin, yet Latin so ancient and pure that even I, trained in the Vulgate, can scarce follow its meaning. What I have understood fills me with awe and terror in equal measure. The voices are reciting names, names of every man, woman, and child who has ever lived. Not merely their baptismal names, but the sum total of their lives, every word spoken, every deed done, every thought conceived. The recitation is complete and perfect, as though the earth itself remembers every moment of every life and preserves that memory in eternal record. In my visions, I see the place where this record is kept. It is not heaven, nor is it hell, but something between or beyond both, a vast cathedral carved from living rock, extending down into the earth far beyond any depth man has delved. Its walls are lined not with paintings or tapestries, but with stone tablets, millions upon millions of them, each inscribed with the complete record of a single human life. As each person dies, I see their tablet completed and filed away in perfect order. Angels do not tend this archive, or if they are angels, they are unlike any described in Scripture. They are beings of stone and silence, moving through the cathedral's endless corridors with purposeful precision, adding new tablets to the collection, maintaining the eternal record. In the deepest part of my visions, I descend through the cathedral's many levels. Each level corresponds to a different age of the world. The uppermost levels hold the records of those recently dead, while the lower levels contain the tablets of the ancients, going back through all the generations of man to Adam himself. But the cathedral extends deeper still, down to levels that should not exist, for they contain tablets that have not yet been inscribed. These are the lives of those not yet born, and even of those who may never be born, all possible lives, all possible choices, all preserved and filed before they occur. This is what troubles me most. If our lives are recorded before we live them, what then of free will? Are we merely acting out scripts already written in stone, following paths already carved, speaking words already inscribed? Yet I am told by the voices, by the visions, by the humming beneath the earth, that both are true. We choose freely, yet our choices are known before we make them. The archive does not constrain us, but rather expands to encompass all our possible choices, preserving every path we might take. Last night, in the deepest vision yet, I descended to the very foundation of the cathedral. There, beneath all the tablets, beneath all the records, I found the source of the humming. It is a stone, vast beyond measure, black as midnight, yet containing within it sparks of light like distant stars. This stone is not inscribed, but rather speaks itself. It is the original word, from which all other words and records flow. As I stood before this stone, I understood that I was not merely witnessing it, but was part of it. My own life, this very moment of vision, was being recorded even as I experienced it. I was both observer and observed, both reader and text. The archive contained me even as I contained the knowledge of the archive. A voice spoke from the stone, and though it shook the foundations of that impossible cathedral, it was also gentle as a whisper. Everything is preserved, nothing is lost. All shall be filed until the end of days, and beyond the end shall the filing continue. I asked, though, whether I spoke aloud, or merely thought the words. I cannot say I asked why. Why must everything be recorded? Why must every life be preserved in such complete detail? The answer came not in words, but in understanding that flooded my mind like light. because love requires memory. God's love for his creation is so complete that he forgets nothing, loses nothing, allows nothing to slip into true oblivion. We are remembered absolutely, and that remembrance is eternal life. Yet this understanding brings no comfort, for I also perceive that this archive exists not merely in some spiritual realm, but here, in the physical world. The earth itself is the archive. Every stone, every grain of sand, every drop of water carries within it the complete record of all that has transpired. We walk upon a vast library. We breathe air that remembers every breath ever taken. We are surrounded by, composed of, inseparable from the eternal record. Since these visions began, I can no longer pray without hearing the humming of the archive beneath me. I can no longer take the Eucharist without tasting in the bread and wine, the memory of all meals ever eaten, all sacrifices ever made. I am being absorbed into the record, becoming less a living man and more a text written in flesh, a story told in breath and bone. I do not know how much longer I can endure this knowledge. The silence of my cell is no longer silent. The darkness holds no peace. I am never alone, for I am always accompanied by all the possible versions of myself, all the lives I might have lived, all pressing close around me like pages of a book, waiting to be read. If any find this record after my death, know that I was faithful to my vows to the end. I did not leave my cell. I did not abandon my devotions. But know also that I learned what should perhaps remain unknown, that we live not once but infinitely, not in time but in eternity, and that every moment of our existence is filed away forever in an archive that has no end. The humming grows louder. I hear my name being added to the recitation. I am being recorded even now, even as I write these final words. Servatum est, numquam clausum, Brother Godric, Anchorite, 4th June, 1182. Archivist's note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Parchment discovered during renovation of St. Guthlac's Church, 1927, sealed within Anchorite cell closed since medieval period. Carbon dating confirms late 12th century origin. Text written in monk's hand, ink composition consistent with period. Historical records confirm anchorite named Godric enclosed in cell at St. Guthlac's circa 1175. Burial records indicate death 1183, cause unspecified. Local tradition describes Godric as mystic, who heard the voice of stones. The concept of earth as archive, physical world functioning as recording medium, represents geological expansion of preservation principle. Compare case file NOA 1314S regarding singing stones and case file NOA 1701B regarding fungal information encoding. Phrase Servatum est. Numquam clausum appears in Brother Godric's hand, second documented occurrence of archive inscription, suggesting transmission across centuries through visionary experience rather than direct textual influence. Acoustic monitoring of St. Guthlac's crypt reveals persistent 111 Hz resonance, particularly pronounced in former anchorite cell. Limestone walls exhibit microscopic crystalline structures in non-random arrangements. Analysis suggests possible piezoelectric properties, allowing stone to encode vibrational information. Case file NOA 1182R. Active under Mystical Experience Register. Cross-reference Geological Memory Archive. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA 1645A. Classification Anatomist's Dissection Record. Date of statement 19th October 1645. Location Barber Surgeons' Hall, London. Author, Dr. Marcus Ashford, anatomist and physician. Anatomical observations. In accordance with the charter granted to the Company of Barber Surgeons, I conducted the annual anatomical dissection for the instruction of apprentices and the advancement of medical knowledge. The subject was the body of one Thomas Garrett, convicted of murder and hanged at Tyburn on the 16th instant, his corpse granted to the company for anatomical study as prescribed by law. The body arrived in good condition, death having occurred approximately 48 hours prior. Rigor mortis had passed, leaving the flesh pliant and suitable for dissection. I began the procedure in the customary manner, making the primary incision from sternum to pubis to expose the abdominal cavity. The internal organs appeared normal upon initial inspection. I proceeded to remove them serially, explaining to the assembled students the function and arrangement of each structure. Heart, lungs, liver, stomach, intestines, all presented in expected configuration with no signs of disease or abnormality. Yet when I opened the stomach, I discovered something I have never encountered in 20 years of anatomical study. Within the stomach cavity, in addition to the partially digested remains of the condemned man's final meal, I found a quantity of what appeared to be ash grey, fine as powder, but possessing a strange weight that seemed disproportionate to its volume. More peculiar still, when I attempted to remove this ash for closer examination, it would not transfer to the specimen dish. Though appearing dry as dust, it clung to the stomach's inner lining like wet clay, and when I tried to scrape it free, it began to glow with a faint pale light. The students murmured in amazement, some claiming miracle, others suspecting some trick or illusion. I assured them it was neither, though I could offer no natural explanation. As we watched, the ash began to move, flowing of its own accord across the stomach's surface, arranging itself into patterns that resembled letters or symbols. I called for pen and paper to record these marks, but by the time I returned my attention to the specimen, the ash had reformed into new configurations. It was writing itself continuously, never remaining in one arrangement for more than a few moments. My apprentice, young Hartley, who has some knowledge of classical languages, claimed he could read fragments of Latin among the constantly shifting symbols. He copied what he could discern, and when we later examined his transcription, we found phrases relating to preservation, memory, and eternal recording. Most disturbing was what occurred when I attempted to remove the heart for examination. The organ appeared normal externally, but when I made the initial incision to inspect the chambers, I heard from within the heart a sound like whispered speech. I hesitate to record this, knowing how fantastical it sounds, yet I am bound by scientific duty to report observations accurately. The heart spoke, not in the manner of a living man, but in a voice that seemed to emerge from the tissue itself, from the very substance of the muscle and vessels. The words were indistinct, but the rhythm was clear, a continuous recitation, like a clerk reading from a ledger. I pressed my ear closer and heard what sounded like a list of dates and times, each followed by a brief phrase: first breath drawn, first step taken, first word spoken. It was reciting the life of Thomas Garrett in chronological order, every significant event from birth to death, all stored somehow within the very tissue of his heart. I dissected further, examining other organs, and found similar phenomena in each. The lungs whispered of every breath taken, the liver spoke of every toxin processed, the brain, when I finally opened the skull, hummed with the accumulated memories of an entire life, still present despite death, still preserved somehow within the cooling flesh. The students grew fearful and began to leave. I cannot fault them, for I too felt a deep unease. We are taught that death is the end of the body's function, that the flesh decays and returns to dust, that the soul departs, and only empty matter remains. Yet here was evidence that the body itself keeps some kind of record, that our experiences are inscribed not merely in memory but in flesh, and that this inscription persists beyond death. As evening approached and the light failed, I concluded the dissection. But when I attempted to dispose of the organs in the customary manner, burning them in the hall's furnace, the flames would not consume them fully. The flesh charred and blackened, but a residue remained, that same grey ash, glowing faintly, humming with voices too quiet to comprehend, but too persistent to ignore. I collected this ash and sealed it in a lead casket, which I have stored in the hall's vault. Each night since, I have heard from that vault a sound like pages turning, though the casket remains locked and contains no books. I have conducted no further dissections. The students ask why, and I tell them the company has suspended the practice pending review of procedures. But the truth is, I cannot bear to open another body, to hear again those whispered records, to discover that we carry within our very flesh a library of our lives that survives death itself. If the body is archive, what then is resurrection? Do we rise in flesh that remembers, or does God erase the record and grant us new vessels unmarked by accumulated history? I fear the answer, whatever it may be. Dr. Marcus Ashford, Barber Surgeons' Hall, London, 19th October, 1645. Archivist's note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Manuscript recovered from Royal College of Surgeons' Archives, 1931. Marcus Ashford appears in company records as Freeman of Barber Surgeons 1627 through 1649. No dissection records exist after 1645. Ashford died 1652, age 63. Burial records note unusual request that his body not be subjected to anatomical study. The lead casket mentioned was discovered during renovation of Barber Surgeons' Hall foundations, 1897. Contents: approximately 3 pounds of grey ash exhibiting properties consistent with cremated human remains, but containing additional elements in unusual concentrations, particularly carbon compounds in crystalline arrangements. Spectroscopic analysis reveals ash contains complex organic molecules not typically surviving high-temperature combustion. Molecular structure suggests information encoding capacity similar to DNA, but utilizing different chemical mechanisms. When subjected to low-frequency acoustic stimulation at 111 Hz, ash particles vibrate in coordinated patterns, suggesting structured rather than random organization. The concept of body as recording medium, physiological tissue, maintaining experiential archive, represents biological expansion of preservation principle. Cross-reference case file NOA1182R regarding embodied memory systems. Case file NOA1645A, active under Anatomical Phenomena Register. Cross-reference, Biological Archive Systems. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA1278C. Classification: Cathedral Builder's Account. Date of statement: 28th July, 1278. Location: Wells Cathedral, Somerset. Author: Master William of Worcester, Master Mason. Record of construction: I, William of Worcester, Master Mason, in charge of works upon the great Cathedral of Wells, do record here an occurrence of such strangeness that I fear to speak of it, yet dare not leave it unrecorded. We have been engaged these past 3 years in the construction of the cathedral's west front, that great screen of stone that shall proclaim God's glory to all who approach. The work is intricate and demanding, requiring the carving of hundreds of figures, saints, angels, prophets, and kings, all to be arranged in harmonious order according to the sacred design. The stone for this work comes from the quarries at Doulting, 12 miles distant, where lies limestone of exceptional quality and beauty. The quarrymen know their craft well and deliver stone of consistent character, well suited to the detailed carving required. Yet in the last shipment, one block arrived that was unlike the others. In size and shape, it matched the rest, but its colour was different, not the warm cream of Doulting stone, but a grey like storm clouds, and cold to the touch, even in summer heat. I directed the carvers to set it aside, intending to return it to the quarry as unsuitable, but that night I heard singing from the mason's yard where the stones are kept. I went to investigate, thinking perhaps the apprentices were making merry after the day's work, but I found the yard empty and the singing continued. The sound came from the grey stone. I approached and placed my hand upon its surface, and the moment I did so, I saw not with my eyes but in my mind a vision of such clarity that I knew it to be true memory, though not my own. I saw the quarry at Doulting, but not as it is now. I saw it as it was in ages past, before the Romans came, before even the ancient Britons built their hill forts. I saw the limestone forming, layer upon layer, beneath a sea that covered all this land. And I saw within that ancient sea creatures beyond counting, their shells and bones settling to the bottom, compressing over ages into the stone we now carve. But I saw something else as well. Among those ancient creatures were forms that should not have existed, beings that were neither fish nor serpent, but something other, moving through the water with purposeful intelligence. As they died, they too were compressed into stone, and the knowledge they possessed, the memories they carried, became part of the rock itself. This grey stone was formed from such creatures. It remembers things no stone should remember. It knows things no inanimate matter should know. When the vision ended, I found myself on my knees before the stone, and upon its surface I saw writing that had not been there before, letters carved in a script I did not recognize, yet somehow understood. They said, "We who became stone do not forget. We are preserved. We shall witness." In the morning, I ordered the stone incorporated into the cathedral foundation, deep beneath the floor where none would see it. I told the carvers it was unsuitable for the facade, which was true enough, though not for the reasons I gave. But the stone would not stay quiet. As it was moved into position, it sang not loudly but persistently, a low humming that resonated through the other stones of the foundation. The masons who handled it reported strange dreams that night, visions of the cathedral not as we build it, but as it shall be centuries hence, and stranger still, visions of what shall stand here long after the cathedral itself has crumbled to dust. I have spent the weeks since examining the other stones we have incorporated into the building. All of them sing, though more quietly than the grey stone. All of them remember, after their fashion, the seas and swamps and forests they once were part of. The cathedral we are building is constructed of memory, of stone that has witnessed the passage of ages and preserves that witness within its substance. I wonder now about the purpose of our work. Are we building a house of God, or are we constructing an archive? Each carved figure, each carved leaf and flower, each inscribed letter of scripture, are these decorations, or are they records, ways of encoding information into stone so that it might be preserved eternally? The grey stone still sings in the foundation. At night, when the works are quiet and I lie awake in my chamber, I can hear it through the thickness of earth and newer stone. It sings of things that were, and of things that shall be, and of things that exist outside time altogether. I fear that in building this cathedral, we are not merely raising walls and vaults. We are creating something that will outlast us all, something that will remember us when we are long dust, something that is itself a kind of consciousness constructed of accumulated stone and accumulated memory. God willing, the work shall be completed in His glory. But I cannot shake the feeling that we are not the masters of this construction, but its servants, following a design that was laid out long before we were born, building an archive that shall preserve all knowledge until the end of days. Master William of Worcester, Wells Cathedral, 28th July, 1278. Archivists note Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Parchment fragment discovered during Victorian restoration of Wells Cathedral foundations, 1879. William of Worcester appears in cathedral building accounts, 1275 through 1283. Structure's west facade, considered masterpiece of Gothic sculpture, was completed 1290. Geological survey of Wells Cathedral foundation stones, conducted 1968, revealed unusual specimen embedded in western foundation pier. Stone exhibits different composition from surrounding dolting limestone, higher density, darker coloration, and crystalline structure, suggesting non-standard formation conditions. Acoustic testing of the anomalous foundation stone reveals persistent vibration at 111 Hz, detectable only with sensitive equipment. Vibration appears to propagate through surrounding masonry, suggesting entire cathedral structure may function as resonating system. Similar phenomena documented in other Gothic cathedrals, particularly those incorporating limestone from ancient marine deposits. The concept of architecture as archive, built structures functioning as information preservation systems, represents constructed expansion of archive principles. Medieval master masons may have possessed knowledge of stone's mnemonic properties, deliberately incorporating responsive materials into sacred buildings. Paleontological analysis of the anomalous stone reveals fossil inclusions of marine organisms, but also organic structures of unknown classification, suggesting presence of extinct species or possibly contamination from uncertain source. Case file NOA 1278C, active, under Architectural Phenomena Register, cross-reference, Lithic Memory Archive. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA 1596H. Classification: Cartographer's Travel Journal. Date of statement: 6th September 1596. Location: near Loch Ness, Scottish Highlands. Author: Master Gerard Holinshed, cartographer in service to the Crown. Survey notes: in the course of preparing accurate maps of the Scottish Highlands for Her Majesty's government, I have travelled extensively through regions seldom visited by learned men. The work is arduous and often dangerous, the terrain difficult and the weather unpredictable, yet I persist, for accurate maps are essential to the proper governance and defence of the realm. On the 4th instant, while surveying the northern shore of the great loch called Ness, I observed a phenomenon that has no place on any map, yet which I feel compelled to document. The weather was fair, the loch's surface calm as glass. From my vantage point upon a hillside, I could see for miles across the water, which lies deep and dark in its steep-sided valley. I had set up my instruments to measure angles and distances, beginning the careful work of triangulation that allows me to plot the loch's extent with precision. At approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the water of the loch began to glow from beneath. Not the sparkle of sunlight upon waves, but a deeper illumination, as though fires burned far below the surface. The glow was pale green, and it spread across the entire visible extent of the loch, transforming it into a vast pool of luminous liquid. I thought at first that some peculiarity of light and water created an optical illusion, but as I watched, the glow intensified, and the surface of the loch began to display images. Not reflections of clouds or shore, but pictures that seemed to form within the water itself, scenes of buildings and people, ships and battles, all rendered in that strange green light. I realized I was seeing history. The images showed this place as it had been in ages past. Forests covering hills now bare, settlements long vanished, events long forgotten. The water was displaying its memory, showing all that it had witnessed during the countless years since the great ice carved this valley. The images appeared in chronological order, starting with scenes of impossible antiquity creatures, unlike any that walk the earth today, forests of plants that have no modern equivalent. Then came the arrival of man, first the ancient hunters, then the builders of stone circles, then warriors in bronze and iron, then monks and Vikings, and finally the people of our own age. But the images did not stop with the present. They continued forward, showing scenes that have not yet occurred. This valley in times to come, with buildings and devices I could not understand, people dressed in strange garments, and over it all a sense of great change and turmoil. I watched transfixed as decades, perhaps centuries, scrolled past in the water's display. I saw the loch itself change, saw the water level rise and fall, saw structures built upon its shores and then abandoned, saw boats upon its surface that bore no resemblance to any vessels I know. And then I saw something else, something that moved beneath these images of surface history. Deep in the glowing water, something vast stirred, not a creature of flesh, but a form made of the same luminous substance as the images themselves. It rose slowly from the depths, and as it ascended, I understood what I was seeing. It was the loch's memory taking shape, all the accumulated history of this place coalescing into a single entity. Every event that had ever occurred in these waters, every creature that had ever swum here, every person who had ever drowned, all of it compressed and preserved and given a kind of terrible life. The form broke the surface, and I saw that it had the rough semblance of a serpent or dragon, but constructed of images and memories rather than scale and bone. Its eyes were pools within pools, containing countless reflected scenes. Its body was composed of layered history, transparent and translucent, past and future existing simultaneously within its substance. It looked directly at me, and in that moment of contact, I heard a voice that spoke not to my ears but directly into my mind. I am the archive of the deep. I preserve what the water knows. You who map the surface know that I map the depths, and in my keeping is recorded every secret these waters hold. The creature spoke no more, but descended again into the depths, pulling the glowing images down with it. Within moments, the loch returned to its normal appearance, dark, still, reflecting only the grey sky above. I have recorded these events in my private journal, but will not include them in my official survey. Maps show terrain and distance, not visions and speaking memories. Yet I know now that beneath every body of water, every loch and lake and sea, lies a repository of history that humans have not begun to access. We map the land, but ignore the archives that lie beneath the water's surface, recorded in liquid and preserved in depths where light does not reach. Perhaps this is mercy. Perhaps we are not meant to know all that the water remembers. I have completed my survey of Loch Ness and moved on to other regions. But each night, when I lie down to sleep, I dream of the deep, and I hear that voice repeating its message. I am the archive. I preserve. I remember. Master Gerard Holinshed. Scottish Highlands, 6th September, 1596. Archivist's note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Journal recovered from Bodleian Library Map Collection, 1948. Gerard Holinshed produced several detailed maps of Scottish Highlands 1595 through 1599. This private journal entry was not included in his official survey reports. The phenomenon described water as historical recording medium represents liquid state expansion of archive preservation principle. Folk traditions worldwide describe water as possessing memory, with lakes and wells serving as repositories of local history. Loch Ness specifically features in numerous accounts of anomalous phenomena, most notably recurring descriptions of large unidentified creature. However, Holinshed's account predates typical monster reports by centuries and describes entity as composed of accumulated memories rather than biological organism. Limnological studies of Loch Ness reveal unusual properties: extraordinary depth, nearly 800 feet, minimal light penetration below 600 feet, and water stratification that prevents vertical mixing. These conditions could theoretically preserve information-bearing chemical gradients for extended periods. Sonar surveys conducted 1960 through 1980 recorded unexplained echoes from deep water, particularly from thermocline layer at approximately 400 feet depth. Echo patterns exhibit regular rather than random characteristics. One research team noted in unpublished notes that echo patterns resemble data structure more than geological formation. Case file NOA 1596H, active under Aquatic Memory Register. Cross-reference, Liquid Archive Systems. End of file. Proceeding to next recovered document. The following document was never intended for public release. Case file NOA 1763P. Classification: Prison Chaplain's Letter. Date of statement: 11th March, 1763. Location: Newgate Prison, London. Author: Reverend Samuel Pritchard, Chaplain. Confidential correspondence. To the Right Reverend Bishop of London, my Lord, I write to you in my capacity as chaplain to Newgate Prison concerning matters that deeply trouble my conscience and challenge my understanding of divine providence. It is my duty to minister to the condemned, to hear their confessions and prepare their souls for the judgment that awaits beyond the scaffold. In the 14 years I have served in this capacity, I have heard more confessions than I can count, witnessed more deaths than I care to remember, and borne witness to the final moments of souls both penitent and defiant. Yet in these recent months I have observed a phenomenon that I cannot explain by reference to scripture or natural philosophy. The condemned in their final hours speak not only of their crimes and their hopes for salvation, but also of visions they experience within their cells, visions so consistent in their details that I cannot dismiss them as mere fancy or the ravings of desperate minds. They report seeing, in the darkness of their cells, what they describe as a great book, not a physical tome but a vision of one, hovering in the air before them, its pages turning of their own accord. Upon those pages, they say, is written the complete record of their lives, every action, every thought, every word spoken from birth to the present moment. At first, I attributed these reports to guilt-stricken imagination, the mind's attempt to reckon with mortality by creating metaphors of divine judgment. But the consistency of the descriptions, the specific details that match across different prisoners who have had no contact with one another, suggests something more than individual fantasy. One man, awaiting execution for highway robbery, described the book's appearance with such precision that I recorded his words verbatim. The pages were not paper but something like water frozen mid-flow, transparent yet solid. The writing upon them was not ink but light, and it did not merely spell out words but showed events themselves, moving like reflections in a stream. I saw my entire life not as memory but as present reality, all moments existing at once. Another prisoner, a woman convicted of infanticide, reported similar visions but added disturbing details. She claimed that beyond the pages recording her own life, she glimpsed other books, thousands upon thousands of them, filling a vast library that extended in all directions beyond her ability to perceive its limits. Each book, she said, contained a complete human life, and together they formed an archive of every soul that had ever lived. Most troubling was the account of a man executed yesterday morning. In our final interview, he told me that the book appeared to him not as judgment, but as mercy, that in seeing his life recorded so completely, he understood that nothing was truly lost, that every moment of joy and sorrow, sin and repentance had been preserved and would continue to exist long after his body was cold in the ground. He said, "Father, I am afraid not of death, but of living forever in those pages. My sins are recorded there, yes, but so too are my loves, my hopes, my small kindnesses. The book preserves it all, and in preserving, it keeps me alive even after I cease to breathe. I do not know if this is heaven or hell, or something else entirely." When I asked him what he meant by something else entirely, he replied, "Perhaps it is simply the way of things, Father. Perhaps everything is written down somewhere, by someone or something, and the writing is what makes it real. Perhaps we exist because we are read, and when we die, we do not end but simply turn the page." He went to the gallows with unusual calm, and his final words from the scaffold were these: "I am preserved, I am filed, I shall never close. My Lord, I do not know what to make of these reports. Are they genuine visions granted to the condemned in their final hours, showing them the true nature of divine record-keeping? Or are they hallucinations born of fear and the peculiar atmosphere of prison cells, where darkness and despair breed strange fancies? Yet I cannot ignore the consistency of these accounts, nor the peace they seem to bring to some who experience them. Several of the condemned have gone to their deaths with expressions not of terror but of wonder, as though they had glimpsed something beyond this world that transformed their understanding of death itself. I confess that I too have begun to wonder if there is truth in what they report. When I say prayers in the chapel, I sometimes feel as though I am being observed not by God alone but by something else, a presence that is neither benevolent nor malevolent, but simply attentive, recording, preserving. At night, when the prison is quiet and I lie awake in my chambers, I hear beneath the usual sounds of the building a faint humming, like distant voices reading aloud in unison. I have searched for the source of this sound, but can find none. It seems to come from the walls themselves, as though the very stones of Newgate have absorbed the stories of all who have lived and died within them, and now give those stories voice. I request your guidance in this matter. Should I encourage the condemned to seek conventional forms of repentance and salvation, or should I acknowledge these visions as potentially valid mystical experiences? Does God preserve our lives in some eternal archive? And if so, what implications does this have for our understanding of judgment and redemption? I remain your Lordship's most obedient and humble servant, Reverend Samuel Pritchard, Chaplain, Newgate Prison, 11th March, 1763. Archivist's note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Letter discovered in Lambeth Palace Library, Ecclesiastical Correspondence, 1956. Samuel Pritchard served as Newgate Chaplain, 1749 through 1764. Records indicate he suffered mental breakdown 1765, claiming he could hear every voice that had ever spoken within prison walls. He was committed to private care and died 1768. Newgate Prison was demolished in 1904. End of file. Case closed to public record. The original document remains sealed within the vaults of the British Museum. Further access requires written authorization or curiosity strong enough to ignore the warnings. Until next time, this has been the National Occult Archive.